She stood at the altar in a dress worth thousands, hiding bruises worth nothing. The man beside her smiled for the cameras while his grip on her wrist promised punishment later. In 48 hours, Lena Cross would either become a Hale or she would disappear entirely. This isn't a love story. This is a hostage situation dressed in white lace. If you want to see how far this story reaches, drop a comment with your city below. Hit that like button and stay until the end, because what happens next will shatter everything you think you know about power, control, and the price of freedom. The organist struck the first notes of Pachelbel's canon, and Lena's hands went cold. Not nervous bride cold, trapped animal cold. She stood in the cathedral's antechamber, staring at her reflection in a full-length mirror that probably cost more than her entire childhood. The dress was stunning. Everyone had said so. Imported Italian lace, hand-beaded bodice, a train that required 2 attendants to manage. It fit perfectly because Adrian's mother had insisted on 7 fittings, each one more humiliating than the last. Shoulders back, the seamstress had murmured during the final session, pinching the fabric tighter across Lena's ribs. Mr. Hale likes his women to stand straight. Lena had stood straight. She'd stood straight through every fitting, every dinner, every carefully orchestrated photo opportunity. She'd smiled when told to smile, laughed when expected to laugh, and kept her mouth shut when Adrian's father made comments about her background that landed just shy of outright insults. She'd done everything right, and still she could feel the bruise on her left wrist throbbing beneath the delicate lace sleeve. 5 minutes, Miss Cross. The wedding coordinator, a rail-thin woman named Patricia who spoke in the clipped tones of someone perpetually disappointed, appeared in the doorway. She held a tablet and wore a headset, as if coordinating a wedding required the same tactical precision as a military operation. In the Hale family's case, maybe it did. "Thank you," Lena managed. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Patricia's eyes swept over her with professional assessment. "You look beautiful. The photographer wants one more shot before we begin. Stand by the window. Natural light." Lena moved where directed. She'd gotten good at following directions these past 3 weeks. Good at becoming whatever shape fit the space they needed her to fill. The photographer, a bearded man in his 40s who smelled like cigarettes and expensive cologne, circled her with his camera. "Gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Can you give me a slight smile? Think about your future husband." Lena thought about Adrian. She thought about the way he'd grabbed her wrist in the car yesterday when she'd suggested postponing the wedding, how his voice had dropped to that dangerous whisper he used when they were alone. "We're past the point of suggestions, darling. You know what happens if you embarrass my family." She thought about the folder he'd shown her, photographs, documents, evidence of crimes she'd never committed but that would absolutely destroy the one person she still cared about if they went public. Her smile must have been convincing because the photographer nodded, satisfied. "Perfect. That's the one." He showed her the image on his camera screen. In it, she looked radiant, ethereal, like a woman on the happiest day of her life. Lena had never been a particularly good liar, but apparently she'd learned. "Miss Cross?" Patricia again, more insistent. "It's time." The walk from the antechamber to the cathedral's main entrance took less than a minute, but felt infinite. Lena could hear the murmur of voices beyond the massive oak doors. 300 guests, all of them part of the Hale family's carefully curated social circle. Politicians, business magnates, old money in new suits. None of them knew her. None of them had asked why Adrian Hale, 34-year-old heir to a pharmaceutical empire, had suddenly gotten engaged to a 28-year-old nobody who worked as an executive assistant in a mid-tier consulting firm. They didn't ask because people like the Hales didn't answer questions. They made statements, and everyone else adjusted accordingly. The doors opened. Organ music swelled. Lena stepped into the cathedral and felt 300 pairs of eyes land on her like a physical weight. The aisle stretched ahead, impossibly long. White roses and hydrangeas lined every pew. Afternoon sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt like a procession to a funeral. Her funeral. Adrian stood at the altar, devastatingly handsome in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of symmetrical features that looked carved rather than born. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his smile warm and genuine for the cameras positioned at strategic angles throughout the cathedral. He looked like a man in love. Lena knew better. She knew the calculation behind that smile. The same calculation that had led him to her apartment 6 weeks ago with an offer that wasn't really an offer. Marry me, and Marcus stays safe. Refuse, and I'll make sure he spends the next 20 years in prison for crimes you both know he didn't commit. Marcus, her younger brother, 24 years old, working 2 jobs to put himself through graduate school, completely unaware that his sister was about to destroy her life to save his. Lena took another step down the aisle, then another. The music continued, relentless and beautiful. She could see Adrian's father in the front row, Reginald Hale, 72 years old and still the most terrifying man Lena had ever met. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with eyes like chips of blue ice. He nodded at her as she passed, a gesture of approval that made her skin crawl. Next to him sat Adrian's mother, Catherine, 58, surgically preserved, wearing enough diamonds to fund a small country. She dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, playing the role of emotional mother flawlessly. Everything was a performance. Everything was control. Lena reached the altar. Adrian extended his hand and she took it because what else could she do? His fingers wrapped around hers, warm and steady and absolutely proprietary. "You look incredible," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. Then, even quieter, "Don't fuck this up," the officiant began. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Lena's mind drifted. She thought about 3 months ago, about the life she'd been building. Small, yes. Unglamorous, absolutely. But hers. She'd worked her way up from temp positions to a decent job with benefits. She'd found an apartment she could almost afford. She'd started taking night classes in graphic design, thinking maybe she could do something creative, something that mattered. She'd been happy. Not ecstatically happy, not movie montage happy, but content in a way that felt earned. Then Adrian had walked into her office building for a meeting with her boss, and everything had changed. She remembered that first conversation in the elevator, how charming he'd been, how interested in her opinions about the presentation they'd both just sat through. He'd asked for her number, and she'd given it to him because he seemed nice and normal and refreshingly straightforward. The first date had been wonderful. Dinner at a restaurant she could never afford on her own, conversation that flowed easily. His full attention on her in a way that felt intoxicating after years of being invisible. The second date, he'd mentioned his family in passing. Old money, kind of suffocating sometimes. I try not to let it define me. She'd appreciated that. The self-awareness. By the 4th date, she'd started to notice things. The way waiters moved around him with subtle deference. How his credit card was black and heavy, the kind reserved for people who measured wealth in commas, not numbers. The car he drove, a Bentley he described as nothing special. But he'd been so careful to make her feel equal, to act like her background didn't matter, to suggest she was interesting for reasons beyond whatever game he was playing. She'd believed him, right up until the night he'd taken her to meet his parents. That dinner had been a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as family bonding. Reginald had asked pointed questions about her education, her family, her prospects. Catherine had smiled with all her teeth and none of her eyes. Adrian had sat there, saying nothing, while his father dissected her entire existence over Dover sole and a wine that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "I think you're delightful," Reginald had said as they were leaving. Exactly what Adrian needs right now. Fresh perspective. Uncomplicated. Uncomplicated. The word had stuck with her for days. Not because it was insulting, though it was, but because of the way Reginald had said it. Like she was a solution to a problem, a tool for a specific purpose. She'd tried to break things off the next week. Adrian had taken it well. Too well. He'd nodded, said he understood, wished her the best. 2 days later, the police had shown up at Marcus's apartment with a warrant. Fraud, embezzlement, evidence that supposedly tied him to a scheme to steal from his employer. All of it meticulously fabricated. Every document false, but convincingly so. Every witness paid or coerced. Lena had known immediately. She'd called Adrian, hands shaking, voice breaking. "What did you do?" His response had been calm, almost kind. "I'm protecting my interests. Marcus can walk away from this unscathed, but only if you make the right choice. Marry me, Lena. Play your part, or watch your brother's life get destroyed piece by piece. Your decision. If anyone present knows of any reason why this couple should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." The officiant's words cut through Lena's thoughts. This was it, the moment in movies where someone objected, where the truth came out and everything stopped. No one spoke. Of course no one spoke. These people didn't care about truth, they cared about reputation, about maintaining the pristine surface that hid the rot underneath. The officiant smiled. Very well. Adrian Hale, do you take this woman? I do. Adrian's voice was clear, confident. He squeezed Lena's hand harder than necessary. And do you, Lena Cross, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? Lena opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her throat had closed. Her lungs felt empty. She could feel Adrian's grip tightening, could see the warning in his eyes even as his smile remained perfect for the cameras. Lena? The officiant prompted gently. She was going to say it. She had to say it. Marcus's freedom depended on these two words. Ah! The cathedral doors exploded open with a crash that echoed off the vaulted ceiling like a gunshot. Every head turned. Lena's heart stopped. A man stood in the entrance, backlit by afternoon sun streaming through the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit that looked expensive but not showy. His face was partially shadowed, but Lena knew that silhouette, knew the way he stood, the controlled stillness that preceded action. Victor Moretti, her former employer. The quiet, intense man who'd run the consulting firm where she'd worked before Adrian had swept into her life and dismantled it piece by piece. She hadn't seen him in weeks, hadn't had a chance to say goodbye when she'd submitted her resignation via email, citing personal reasons, because what else could she say? Adrian's hand became a vice around her wrist. Who the hell? He started. Victor walked down the aisle with the kind of calm authority that made people move out of his way without thinking. His eyes were locked on Lena's face, reading everything she was trying to hide. Stop the ceremony, Victor said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the shocked silence like a blade. Reginald Hale stood. This is a private event. You have no right. She's being coerced. 3 words, spoken with absolute certainty. The cathedral erupted in whispers. Adrian's face went carefully blank. You're mistaken. This is my wedding, and you're interrupting. Your hostage situation. Victor stopped at the edge of the altar, 5 feet from where Lena stood frozen. I'm calling it what it is. Security! Catherine Hale's voice shrill with indignation, but Victor didn't move, didn't run. He pulled something from his jacket, a folder, simple and unmarked, and held it up for everyone to see. I have evidence, he said, addressing the room rather than the Hales. Documentation of threats made against Marcus Cross. Proof of fabricated criminal charges. Communications between Reginald Hale and various officials demonstrating a pattern of coercion and corruption, all of it admissible in court, all of it verifiable. Lena couldn't breathe. When had he... Adrian's grip on her wrist became painful. You have nothing. This is slander, and my family's attorneys will... Your family's attorneys are currently being served with subpoenas. Victor's gaze shifted to Lena. You have a choice now. A real one. Not the illusion they've been giving you. Patricia, the wedding coordinator, appeared with 2 security guards, both looking uncertain about whose orders to follow. Reginald stepped forward, his face composed but his eyes murderous. Mr. Moretti, is it? I don't know what fantasy you've constructed, but this wedding is proceeding. My son's fiancée is here of her own free will. Then let her say so. All eyes turned to Lena. Adrian's fingers dug into her wrist hard enough to bruise, one more bruise to add to the collection hidden beneath lace and silk. Tell him, Adrian hissed. Tell him you want this. Lena looked at Victor, at the man who'd been nothing but kind to her during the year she'd worked for him, who'd noticed when she stayed late working on projects, who'd recommended her for a promotion she'd never gotten because she'd left before it could process, who'd apparently spent weeks investigating her disappearance from his company because he'd known something was wrong. She looked at Adrian, at the handsome mask he wore, the careful construction of charm over cruelty. She looked at the cathedral full of people who would believe whatever version of reality the Hales decided to sell. And she realized something. Victor had just handed her ammunition, but he couldn't pull the trigger. That choice was hers. For the first time in 6 weeks, the choice was actually hers. No, Lena said. The word came out quiet, but in the absolute silence of the cathedral, it might as well have been a shout. Adrian's face went white, then red. Lena! No. Louder this time, stronger. I don't want this. I never wanted this. She yanked her wrist from his grip, stumbling back a step. The movement dislodged her veil, sending it sliding sideways. She didn't fix it. Catherine made a sound of distress. This is absurd. She's clearly confused. Wedding nerves, nothing more. I'm not confused. Lena turned to face the assembled guests. All these wealthy strangers who'd come to watch her be sacrificed on the altar of the Hales' reputation. Your son threatened my brother. Your husband manufactured evidence to force me into this marriage. And I'm done pretending. The whispers became a roar. Reginald's voice cut through it like ice. You have no proof. Nothing but the word of a hysterical woman and whatever fiction this man has concocted. My family's reputation is beyond reproach. Is it? Victor opened the folder, pulling out a sheaf of documents. Because I have emails between you and Judge Morrison discussing Marcus Cross's case 3 weeks before charges were filed. I have bank records showing payments to witnesses. I have recordings of Adrian threatening Lena. I have everything. He didn't, Lena realized. Not everything. Some of those documents were probably solid, but others, the recordings at least, were a bluff. She could see it in the slight tension around Victor's mouth, the way his fingers held the papers just a fraction too tight. But Reginald didn't know that. For the first time in her life, Lena saw uncertainty flash across Reginald Hale's face. It lasted less than a second before his expression smoothed back into cold authority, but it had been there. Fear, real and unmistakable. You're making a mistake, Reginald said, addressing Victor now. My family has resources you cannot imagine. Lawyers, connections, the ability to make your life very difficult. Threatening me in front of 300 witnesses? Victor's smile was razor thin. Bold choice. Adrian grabbed for Lena's arm again, but she stepped back, putting Victor between them. The movement was instinctive, and Adrian's face twisted with rage at the implication. You ungrateful, Adrian started. Choose your next words carefully. Victor's voice dropped to something dangerous. Because everyone here is watching. Everyone here is recording on their phones. He gestured to the crowd, and sure enough, dozens of smartphones were pointed their direction. Say what you were going to say. Tell them what you really think of the woman you were about to marry. Adrian's mouth snapped shut. The silence stretched. Then Patricia cleared her throat. Should we reschedule? I can have my team. No, Lena said. There's nothing to reschedule. This wedding isn't happening. Not today. Not ever. She started pulling at the engagement ring Adrian had given her, a massive diamond that had felt like a shackle from the moment he'd slid it onto her finger. It stuck on her knuckle, and she twisted it harder, not caring if she scraped her skin raw. Lena, stop. Catherine's voice, trying for maternal concern and landing somewhere near panic. You're distraught. Let's go somewhere private and talk about this. I'm done talking. The ring came free. Lena held it up for a moment, this symbol of everything she'd almost become, then let it fall. It hit the marble floor with a crystalline ping and rolled toward the altar, coming to rest near the officiant's feet. No one moved to pick it up. Lena looked at Victor. The evidence you mentioned, is it real? Can you actually prove what they did? Most of it. He met her eyes steadily. Enough to start an investigation that will uncover the rest. Enough to protect your brother. But I need you to be willing to testify, to go on record about what they did to you. They'll destroy me. It wasn't a question. They'll try. Lena glanced at Adrian, at Reginald, at Catherine with her running mascara and her designer dress. 3 people who'd treated her like a chess piece, like something to be moved and manipulated and ultimately discarded once she'd served her purpose. Okay, Lena said. I'll do it. The cathedral erupted again, but this time Lena didn't care about the noise. She was already moving, heading for the exit, for fresh air, for anywhere that wasn't this beautiful prison. Victor fell into step beside her. I have a car outside, lawyers waiting. We need to move fast. The Hales will try to control the narrative. Let them try. Lena pushed through the doors and into sudden, brilliant sunlight. The summer air hit her face, warm and real, and for the first time in weeks she could actually breathe. Behind them, she could hear shouting. Adrian's voice, Reginald's commands, Catherine's shrill protests. The sound of the perfect Hale family facade cracking in real time. A black sedan waited at the curb. Victor opened the back door and Lena climbed in, her ridiculous wedding dress bunching around her. He got in after her, and the driver, a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and a professional demeanor, pulled smoothly into traffic. "Where are we going?" Lena asked. "Somewhere safe. I have people who can help, lawyers, security, a place they won't think to look." Victor was already on his phone, typing rapidly. "Marcus is being moved to protective custody as we speak. The fake charges against him are being reviewed by an independent prosecutor." "How did you—" Lena trailed off, overwhelmed. Victor looked at her. "You disappeared from work without warning, left everything behind, your desk, your projects, your promotion. I knew something was wrong, so I looked into it." "Why?" The question came out smaller than she intended. "Why would you do that for me?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because in the year you worked for me, you never asked for special treatment, never made excuses. You just did the work, did it well, and expected to be judged on merit. That's rare." He paused. "And because when you left, I ran a background check to make sure you were okay. What I found instead were the first threads of what the Hales were doing. After that, I couldn't look away." Lena stared at her hands. Her left ring finger looked naked without the engagement ring. There was a pale line where it had sat, a ghost of the future she'd almost had. "They're going to come after both of us," she said. "Yes. They'll use everything they have, money, influence, connections." "Absolutely. We might lose." Victor's smile was grim. "We might, but at least we'll go down fighting instead of pretending." The car turned onto a highway, leaving the city behind. Lena watched through the window as buildings gave way to trees, urban sprawl, to something greener and less constrained. Her phone buzzed. She'd turned it to silent for the ceremony, but now she pulled it from the small clutch she'd been carrying. 17 missed calls, 32 text messages, all from numbers associated with the Hales or their proxies. She powered the phone off without reading any of them. "Smart," Victor said. "They'll try to track it. We'll get you a new one." "Who's we?" Lena asked. "You keep saying we like there's a team." "There is. A friend of mine, ex-FBI, specializes in white-collar crime. A lawyer who handles cases like this pro bono. A security consultant who knows how families like the Hales operate." He leaned back against the seat. "You're not alone in this, Lena. Not anymore." The words hit harder than they should have. For weeks, she'd been completely isolated. Adrian had gradually cut her off from friends, from family besides Marcus, from anyone who might have asked inconvenient questions. The isolation had been so gradual, so carefully orchestrated, that she hadn't even noticed until it was complete. Now someone was offering help without conditions, without expecting anything in return. It felt almost too good to be true. "What do you get out of this?" Lena asked. "Everyone wants something." Victor considered the question. "I want to watch Reginald Hale's empire burn. Does that count?" "Why?" "Because 10 years ago, my sister worked for a Hale subsidiary. She found evidence of fraud, tried to report it through proper channels, and got crushed for her trouble. Lost her job, her reputation, her ability to work in her field. The Hales made sure everyone knew she was unstable, unreliable, troubled. She wasn't any of those things. She was just honest." His voice went flat. "She killed herself 3 years ago." Lena's breath caught. "I'm sorry." "I am too, but I'm done being sorry. I'm ready to do something about it." He looked at her directly. "That doesn't mean you owe me anything. If you want to walk away from all of this, I'll still make sure Marcus is protected. This is your choice, Lena. Really yours." The car drove on. Lena thought about Adrian's face when she'd said no. The rage, the entitlement, the absolute certainty that he could control her. She thought about Reginald's cold eyes and Catherine's fake tears, and the entire machinery of power and privilege that had nearly swallowed her whole. She thought about Marcus, brilliant and kind, and completely unaware of how close he'd come to having his life destroyed. "I want to fight," Lena said. "I want to burn it all down." Victor nodded slowly. "Okay, then we fight." Go. The safe house turned out to be a cabin in the woods about 2 hours outside the city. Isolated but not remote, with good security and enough distance that the Hales would need time to locate it. The woman who met them at the door introduced herself as Sarah Chen, the ex-FBI agent Victor had mentioned. She was compact, efficient, and had the kind of eyes that saw everything. "Welcome," Sarah said, looking Lena over. "Hell of a wedding dress. You want to change into something less conspicuous?" Lena looked down at herself. The dress that had cost more than she'd made in 3 months looked absurd here, surrounded by pine trees and practical furniture. "Yes," she said. "Please." Sarah showed her to a bedroom with clothes in the closet, jeans, t-shirts, sweaters in various sizes. "We keep supplies here for situations like this. Help yourself." Lena grabbed jeans and a simple gray sweater, then locked herself in the attached bathroom. She tried to reach the zipper on the dress, but it was positioned just out of reach, designed to require assistance. Of course it was. She struggled for a minute, then gave up and knocked on the door. "Sarah, I need help." Sarah appeared, took one look at the dress, and made a sound of disgust. "Figures, hold still." She unzipped the dress with efficient movements, and Lena let it pool around her feet. Standing there in her underwear, she could finally see the full damage. Bruises on her wrist where Adrian had grabbed her. A faint mark on her shoulder from when he'd shoved her against a wall 3 days ago. Small cruelties hidden under expensive fabric. Sarah noticed but didn't comment. "There's a first aid kit under the sink. Ice packs in the freezer. You need anything? Just ask." "Thank you." Lena changed quickly, grateful for clothes that fit without constraint. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Victor and Sarah in the main room with another person, a man in his 50s with gray hair and reading glasses, currently spreading documents across a large table. "Lena, this is Daniel Park. He's the attorney I mentioned." Daniel stood, extending a hand. "Ms. Cross, I've been reviewing your situation. We have options, but they're not going to be easy." Lena shook his hand. "Easy isn't what I'm looking for. Effective is." "Good. Because effective is going to require you to be willing to expose everything publicly. The threats, the coercion, the abuse, all of it." "They'll say I'm lying." "Of course they will. That's why we need documentation. Victor collected some, but we need more. Anything you can give us, texts, emails, recorded conversations, medical records of injuries, anything that establishes a pattern." Lena thought about her phone, now dead and useless. "My phone has some texts from Adrian, not explicitly threatening, but controlling. And I kept a journal, just notes, really, about what was happening. I didn't know if I'd ever need it, but I couldn't not document it. Felt like the only way to prove to myself it was real." "Where's the journal now?" Sarah asked. "My apartment. I have a box under the bed with personal things. The journal's in there." "Apartment that the Hales have access to?" "Adrian has a key. I gave it to him when we were dating." The words tasted bitter now. Victor and Sarah exchanged glances. "We need to get that journal," Victor said. "Tonight, before they think to look for it." "They'll be watching the place," Sarah countered, "expecting exactly this. So we make them think we're not going there. Create a diversion." Daniel cleared his throat. "While you two plan your heist, I need to prepare Ms. Cross for what's coming. The Hales will file defamation suits. They'll paint you as a gold digger who got cold feet and invented a story to save face. They'll dig into every aspect of your past looking for ammunition." "They won't find much," Lena said. "My past is pretty boring. Work, school, family. Nothing scandalous. They'll make something up if they can't find it. That's how this works." Daniel's expression was kind but firm. "You need to be prepared for strangers dissecting your life in public, for your name to be dragged through every media outlet, for people you've never met to have opinions about your character." Lena sat down heavily. "And Marcus? We're moving to have all charges dismissed tomorrow morning. The prosecutor reviewing the case already found irregularities. With the evidence Victor collected, it should be straightforward." Daniel paused. "But Marcus will need to know what's happening, what you did to protect him. Is he someone who can handle that information?" Lena thought about her brother. Sweet, idealistic Marcus, who believed the world was fundamentally fair and that hard work would be rewarded. Finding out that their enemy had nearly destroyed him would break something in him, but lying to him would be worse. "He can handle it," she said. "He'll need to." Victor's phone rang. He answered, listened, then hung up. "That was my contact at the courthouse. The Hales just filed for an emergency restraining order against you, Lena, claiming you're mentally unstable and a danger to Adrian." "Of course they did." Lena wasn't even surprised. "We'll fight it," Daniel said. "But in the meantime, you need to stay away from them. No contact whatsoever. They'll try to provoke you into doing something they can use against you. Understood. Sarah stood. I'm going to make a supply run. Food, secure phones, equipment for tonight's retrieval operation. Victor, you're with me. Daniel, you stay here with Lena and prep her for depositions. They moved with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. Within minutes, Victor and Sarah were gone, leaving Lena alone with Daniel and a stack of legal documents that represented the beginning of the war she'd just declared. Daniel poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that had been quietly brewing. This is going to be brutal, he said, sliding one across to her. I want to be clear about that. The Hales have unlimited resources and no scruples. They will make this as painful as possible. Why? Lena wrapped her hands around the warm cup. What do they gain from destroying me? I'm nobody. I have nothing they want. You're a threat to their narrative. Adrian was supposed to marry a compliant wife who understood her place in the family structure, someone they could control. By refusing, by exposing them, you've demonstrated that their power has limits. That's intolerable to people like Reginald Hale. So it's about ego. It's about power. Ego is just the delivery mechanism. Daniel sipped his coffee. They'll settle for nothing less than total capitulation or total destruction. There's no middle ground with families like this. Then we give them destruction, Lena said. Just not mine. Daniel smiled slightly. I think we might get along, Ms. Cross. They spent the next 3 hours going through everything. Daniel asked questions with clinical precision, taking notes on a laptop while Lena recounted the past 6 weeks in exhaustive detail. Every threat Adrian had made. Every moment of isolation or control. The dinner with Reginald where he'd made it clear what would happen to Marcus if she didn't cooperate. Did they ever physically harm you? Daniel asked. Lena pulled up her sleeve, showing the bruises. Adrian, when he was angry or when I pushed back on something. Frequency? 3, 4 times. Never where anyone would see. And you documented this? Photos on my phone, dated. Some in the journal with descriptions of what provoked it. Daniel typed rapidly. Good. That's usable. Medical records would be better. Did you ever seek treatment? No, I didn't want to create a paper trail. Didn't want him to know I was documenting anything. Smart, actually. Shows premeditation on your part, awareness that something was wrong. But it also means we're relying heavily on your credibility. He looked up from his laptop. They're going to attack that credibility. I need to know now if there's anything in your past they can use. Arrests, firings, anything that could be twisted into a pattern of dishonesty or instability. Lena thought carefully. I got fired from a retail job when I was 22. Manager said I was stealing, but I wasn't. I think she just didn't like me. I didn't fight it, just moved on. They'll use that. Frame it as a pattern of being accused of dishonesty. What else? I've been in therapy on and off since college. Depression, anxiety, pretty standard stuff. They'll absolutely use that. Try to paint you as mentally unstable. Use the anxiety as evidence you can't be trusted to perceive situations accurately. Daniel made more notes. We'll need your therapist's records to counter that. Show that you're actively managing your mental health, that there's no diagnosis of any condition that would impair your judgment. My therapist is in California. I moved here 2 years ago and never found a new one. That's fine. We'll get the records. Anything else? Lena searched her memory. I dated someone in college who told people I was crazy after we broke up, made up stories about me stalking him. None of it was true, but some people believed him. Name? Jason Reeves. This was 8 years ago. I doubt he even remembers me. The Hales will find him. They'll offer him money to testify that you have a history of making up abuse allegations. Daniel's matter-of-fact tone made it worse somehow. We need to get ahead of that, find out where he is now, what he's likely to say, whether we can impeach his credibility. This is insane. Lena set down her coffee cup. They're going to dig up every mistake I've ever made and use it to prove I deserved what Adrian did. Yes, that's exactly what they're going to do. Daniel closed his laptop. Which is why we need to be perfect from this point forward. No social media posts, no unguarded comments, nothing that can be taken out of context. You're under a microscope now, and everything you do will be scrutinized. For how long? Until this is over. Could be months, could be years. Lena stood, suddenly needing to move. She walked to the window, looking out at the darkening forest. Somewhere out there, the Hales were mobilizing their resources. Lawyers, investigators, media contacts, a machine built to grind people like her into dust. "I can't do this," she said quietly. Behind her, Daniel was silent. Then, "Yes, you can." "You don't know that." "I do, actually, because you're still here. You could have said, 'I do' at that altar, could have gone through with the marriage and tried to survive it, but you didn't. You chose the hard path because it was the right one." He paused. "That takes strength. More strength than you probably realize." Lena pressed her forehead against the cool glass. "I'm terrified." "Good. Fear means you understand what you're up against. Fearless people make stupid mistakes." Daniel's chair creaked as he stood. "We're going to get through this, Ms. Cross, but I need you to trust the process and trust the people who are helping you. Can you do that?" Could she? Lena thought about Victor, who'd blown up a wedding to save her. Sarah, who'd offered ice packs and practical help without judgment. Daniel, who was preparing to go to war against one of the most powerful families in the state on behalf of someone he'd just met. People helping her without expecting anything in return, without treating her like a commodity or a problem to be solved. It was so foreign, it almost hurt. "I'll try," Lena said. "That's all I'm asking." That's Victor and Sarah returned after dark, carrying bags of groceries and equipment. Sarah immediately started setting up what looked like surveillance gear while Victor helped Lena make sandwiches in the small kitchen. "We leave in an hour," Sarah announced. "Lena's apartment is being watched, but not heavily. They're probably assuming we won't be that stupid, which works in our favor." "How are we getting in?" Lena asked. "Fire escape. You said you're on the 3rd floor, correct?" "Yes, but I keep that window locked." "Won't be locked for long." Sarah held up a small toolkit. "I'll go in first, clear the apartment, then you follow. We grab the journal, anything else that might be useful, and we're out in under 5 minutes. "What about Victor?" "I'll be creating a distraction at the front entrance," Victor said. "Pizza delivery gone wrong. Nothing illegal, just enough commotion to draw attention away from the fire escape." It sounded insane. It sounded like something from a movie, not real life. But then again, nothing about the past 6 weeks had felt real. They ate quickly, then changed into dark clothing. Sarah handed Lena a baseball cap and told her to tuck her hair up. "You're recognizable right now. Wedding dress made the evening news already. We need you as anonymous as possible." The drive back to the city took 90 minutes. Lena sat in the back seat of Sarah's nondescript sedan, watching familiar landmarks slide past in the darkness. Every mile closer to her apartment felt like a mile closer to danger. Her phone, the new one Victor had bought, buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Restraining order hearing set for tomorrow, 2 p.m. We'll be ready." Lena stared at the message. Tomorrow she'd stand in front of a judge and argue that Adrian Hale was a threat to her, not the other way around. The Hales would have an army of lawyers. She'd have Daniel and the truth. It didn't feel like enough. "We're close," Sarah said from the driver's seat. "Lena, you ready?" Was she? No, but she nodded anyway. Sarah parked 3 blocks from the apartment building. They walked the rest of the way, staying in shadows, avoiding streetlights. Victor split off at the corner, heading for the main entrance with a pizza box he'd picked up from an actual pizzeria. "May as well make it legitimate," he'd said. Sarah and Lena continued to the alley behind the building. The fire escape was exactly where Lena remembered it, rusted and precarious looking. Sarah tested the ladder, then climbed with practiced ease. Lena followed, trying not to look down. 3 floors felt like 30. At her window, Sarah pulled out the toolkit and worked on the lock. Within seconds, it clicked open. She pushed the window up slowly, listening for any sound from inside. Nothing. Sarah climbed in first, disappearing into the darkness of Lena's apartment. Lena waited, heart hammering, until Sarah reappeared and gestured for her to follow. Entering her own apartment felt like breaking into someone else's life. Everything looked wrong, too neat, too staged. Someone had been here. Probably Adrian, looking for anything that might implicate him. "Where's the journal?" Sarah whispered. "Bedroom. Under the bed, in a box marked winter clothes." They moved quickly through the small space. Lena's bedroom looked undisturbed, but when she knelt and reached under the bed, her hand found the box immediately. Too immediately. It had been moved. She'd pushed it all the way to the wall, but now it sat within easy reach. Someone had looked through it. Sarah, Lena hissed. But Sarah was already drawing a small handgun from her jacket, moving toward the bedroom door with silent precision. A floorboard creaked in the living room. Someone was here. Sarah's hand moved in a sharp gesture. Stay down. Lena froze, still kneeling beside the bed with the box half pulled from underneath. Her fingers found the journal's familiar leather cover, but she didn't dare move to grab it. Another creak, closer this time. Then a voice, achingly familiar, called out from the living room. I know you're here, Lena. The window's open, not exactly subtle. Adrian. Lena's blood went cold. Sarah positioned herself behind the doorframe, gun raised but not visible from the living room. She caught Lena's eye and mouthed, "Keep him talking." "You're trespassing," Lena called back, hating how her voice shook. She grabbed the journal and shoved it inside her jacket, then slowly stood. "In my fiancé's apartment? I don't think that counts." Adrian's footsteps moved closer. "We need to talk about what happened today. That scene you made at the cathedral." "Scene one made?" Lena stepped into the bedroom doorway, keeping Sarah hidden behind her. "You mean when I refused to marry my blackmailer?" Adrian appeared in the hallway, still wearing his tuxedo pants and white shirt, though he'd lost the jacket and tie. He looked exhausted, and for just a moment Lena almost felt sorry for him. Then she remembered the bruises under her sleeves. "That's not what happened," Adrian said. His voice had that reasonable quality he used when he wanted to sound hurt rather than angry. "You got scared. Wedding jitters amplified by that lunatic crashing our ceremony with a folder full of lies." "They weren't lies, weren't they?" "Lena, think about it. Victor Moretti shows up out of nowhere with convenient evidence, and you just believe him? The man clearly has feelings for you. He's manipulating you." Lena laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. "You're really going to talk to me about manipulation? You threatened my brother. You fabricated criminal charges. You put your hands on me." She pulled up her sleeve, showing the fingerprint bruises on her wrist. "This is from yesterday, Adrian, when I asked if we could postpone." Adrian's expression flickered, something that might have been shame if she didn't know better. "I never meant to hurt you. I needed you to understand how important this was, how important you are to my family's plans. I'm not a chess piece." "No, you're the woman I love." He took a step forward, and Sarah's gun hand tensed though she stayed hidden. "I know I handled this badly. I know my father pushed too hard, made threats he shouldn't have made. But the core of it is still true. I want to marry you. I want us to build a life together. Based on lies and coercion. Based on potential. You don't see it yet, but you could be extraordinary. My family has resources, connections, the ability to make things happen. With us, you'd never have to worry about money or security or freedom," Lena finished. "Because that's what you were really offering, wasn't it? A golden cage. Beautiful and suffocating and locked from the outside." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You're being dramatic." "Am I? Tell me, if I'd gone through with the wedding, would things have changed? Would you have suddenly started treating me like an equal instead of property? Marriage is a partnership. Not the kind your parents have. I saw how your father talks to your mother, how she flinches when he's in one of his moods. That's not partnership, that's ownership. You don't know anything about my parents' relationship." "I know enough." Lena crossed her arms, feeling the journal press against her ribs under her jacket. "I know your mother hasn't made a decision without his approval in 40 years. I know she takes pills to get through dinner parties and drinks herself to sleep most nights. I know she's terrified of him." Adrian's face went red. "That's none of your business. It became my business when you tried to turn me into her. When you decided I'd be the next generation of Hale wife, trained to smile and stay quiet and pretend everything's perfect while the men make all the actual choices. It's not like that." "Then what is it like, Adrian?" Lena's voice rose. "Explain it to me. Explain how threatening my brother was an act of love. Explain how bruising my wrist was just you needing me to understand, make it make sense." He stared at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, he seemed at a loss for words. The smooth charm had cracked, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. "My father expects results," Adrian said finally. "He gave me one job. Find a wife who fits the family image. Someone clean, controllable, presentable. Do you know how many women I vetted? How many dates I went on trying to find someone suitable?" "Suitable," Lena repeated flatly. "Yes, suitable. Someone who wouldn't embarrass us, who'd understand what was expected. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect styling. And then I met you, and you were different. Smart, but not threatening. Pretty, but not vain. You had this quality like you were genuinely interested in the world, not just your place in it. So you decided to trap me. I decided to choose you. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. Adrian took another step forward, and this time Sarah moved out from behind the door, gun raised and pointed directly at his chest. That's close enough, Sarah said calmly. Adrian froze, his eyes going wide. Who the hell are you? Someone who doesn't particularly care about your family's reputation. Hands where I can see them. You're pointing a gun at me in my fiance's apartment. That's assault. That's self-defense, actually. You broke in. We have every right to protect ourselves. Sarah's aim didn't waver. Lena, get behind me. Lena moved, but Adrian's hand shot out, grabbing her arm. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop her. Don't, he said. Don't do this. We can fix this, all of it. I'll talk to my father, convince him to drop the charges against Marcus without conditions. You can have space, time, whatever you need. Just don't walk away. Lena looked at his hand on her arm, at his face, which showed what might have been genuine desperation if she still believed anything he expressed was genuine. Let go of me, she said quietly. Lena, let go. He did, his hand falling away like she'd burned him. You don't get it, Lena said. This isn't about negotiation or compromise. This is about the fact that you fundamentally don't see me as a person with the right to make my own choices. You see me as a problem to solve, a position to fill, a role to cast. And I'm done auditioning for your life. That's not true. Isn't it? Name one thing you know about me that you didn't learn from a background check or by asking your investigators. Adrian opened his mouth, then closed it. My favorite book, Lena prompted. The last movie that made me cry. What I wanted to be when I was 10 years old. The reason I moved to this city. Any of it. Adrian, tell me one real thing about me. The silence stretched. You like coffee with too much sugar, Adrian finally said. And you do that thing where you tuck your hair behind your ear when you're nervous. You're allergic to shellfish. Those are observations, not knowledge. Those are things you noticed while evaluating whether I'd fit the role you needed filled. Lena stepped back, putting distance between them. You don't know me. You never wanted to. You just wanted someone who'd play the part convincingly. And what does Victor Moretti want? Adrian's voice turned sharp, defensive. You think he's doing this out of the goodness of his heart? He wants something too. Everyone does. Maybe. But at least he asked what I wanted first. A phone buzzed. Adrian pulled his out, glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted into something calculating. My father's lawyers are filing charges against both of you. Breaking and entering, theft of personal property, assault with a deadly weapon. You're pointing a gun at me, remember? They'll make this very expensive for you. Let them try, Sarah said. We're documenting everything, including you admitting you broke in here. Adrian laughed, short and humorless. You think documentation matters? We own judges, we own prosecutors, we own the entire system that would supposedly protect you. This city runs on hail money, hospitals, schools, infrastructure projects. One phone call from my father, and your evidence becomes inconvenient. Your lawyers become discouraged. Your witnesses forget what they saw. That's a confession, Lena said. You just confessed to corruption, to nothing provable, to how the world actually works. Adrian straightened his shoulders, composure sliding back into place like armor. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to come back with me right now. We're going to tell everyone today was a misunderstanding, wedding stress, nothing more. We'll reschedule for next month, smaller ceremony, and this time there won't be any dramatic interruptions. No, Marcus's charges will disappear. You'll get a generous prenuptial agreement. You can even keep working if you want. I know career matters to you. We'll make it work. I said no. You're not hearing me. Adrian's voice hardened. This isn't a negotiation. You don't have leverage. We have your brother's freedom, your reputation, your entire future in our hands. You can make this easy on everyone, or you can watch us destroy everything you care about piece by piece. Your choice. Lena felt something crack inside her chest. Not breaking, but shifting. like a weight she'd been carrying had suddenly repositioned itself into something she could actually use. "You know what the difference is between you and Victor?" she asked. "Victor gave me a choice and then respected what I chose. You're standing here telling me I don't have one while calling it my decision. Even now, even after I've said no a dozen times, you can't accept that I mean it. Because you're making a mistake. It's my mistake to make. Not when it affects my family's reputation. Not when you could destroy everything we've built." Adrian's mask slipped further, showing the anger underneath. "You're nobody, Lena. A secretary with a community college degree and a brother in trouble. Without us, you're nothing. You'll go back to your mediocre life, your mediocre job, and in 5 years, you'll look back on this moment and realize you threw away the opportunity of a lifetime because you were too stubborn to see sense." Sarah made a small sound like she was physically restraining herself from saying something, but Lena just smiled. "You really believe that, don't you? That your money and your name and your power make you better than me. More important, more valuable as a human being. It's not about belief, it's about reality. Then let me tell you my reality. I'd rather be nobody with my freedom than somebody in your family's prison. I'd rather work a mediocre job than wake up every day next to someone who sees me as an acquisition. I'd rather struggle and fail on my own terms than succeed by your rules." She moved toward the door, and this time Adrian didn't try to stop her. "You can't understand that because you've never had to choose between dignity and comfort. But I have, and I'm choosing dignity every single time." Adrian's phone buzzed again. He looked at it, and whatever he saw made his face go pale. "What is it?" Sarah asked, gun still trained on him, but curiosity evident. "Victor just posted the evidence online," Adrian said, voice hollow. "Everything. Bank records, emails, recordings. It's viral already. 30,000 shares in 15 minutes. Lena's heart jumped. That wasn't the plan. Victor was supposed to go through proper channels, build a legal case, not... Her new phone buzzed. A text from Victor. "Sorry, had to move fast. They were going to bury it through legal channels. This way, it's public record before they can suppress it." Another text, this one from Daniel. "Victor went rogue. We're pivoting. Meet at safe house immediately." "You stupid..." Adrian grabbed for Lena, but Sarah stepped between them, gun raised. "Back off now. Do you understand what you've done?" Adrian wasn't looking at the gun anymore, just at Lena, his expression somewhere between fury and panic. "My father will destroy all of you. Not through courts, through channels you can't even imagine. People will lose jobs. Accidents will happen. You've declared war on a family that doesn't lose." "Maybe it's time someone taught you how," Lena said. Sarah gestured with the gun toward the living room. "Move, we're leaving, you're staying. Count to 100 before you follow, or I stop being polite." They backed toward the window, Lena first, then Sarah. Adrian stood in the hallway, phone in hand, looking like his entire world had just shifted on its axis. "This isn't over," he called as Lena climbed onto the fire escape. "You can't run from us. We're everywhere." "Then I guess everywhere isn't safe for you anymore either," Lena shot back. She descended the fire escape faster than she'd climbed it, Sarah right behind her. At the bottom, Victor was waiting with the car running. "Get in," he said tersely. They scrambled into the vehicle. Victor pulled away from the curb before the doors were fully closed, taking corners fast enough to make the tires squeal. "What the hell were you thinking?" Sarah demanded from the back seat. "Posting evidence online before we had legal protection in place? I was thinking the Hales made 3 calls in the past hour to judges who were about to throw out our case on procedural grounds. I was thinking if we didn't move immediately, everything we had would become inadmissible through technicalities." Victor's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "So I made a choice. Maybe the wrong one. But at least now the evidence exists in public consciousness before they can make it disappear." "You should have consulted us," Lena said. "You were busy breaking into your apartment, which, by the way, was supposed to be a quick in and out. What happened?" Sarah filled him in while Victor drove, taking a route that seemed deliberately circuitous. Lena watched the city slide past, her mind racing. The evidence was public now. That changed everything. The Hales couldn't suppress what thousands of people had already seen and saved and shared. But it also meant they'd escalate. No more subtle threats or legal maneuvering. They'd come at this with everything they had. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts, calls, notifications. She finally looked at the screen and felt her stomach drop. The story was everywhere. Not just the evidence Victor had posted, but commentary, analysis, speculation. Hashtag Hale Exposed was trending. News outlets were picking it up. Someone had found photos from the wedding, stills of Lena standing at the altar looking terrified, of Victor bursting through the doors, of the moment she dropped the engagement ring. "Turn on the radio," Sarah said suddenly. Victor complied, and a news anchor's voice filled the car. Breaking story tonight involving the prominent Hale family. Documents released online allegedly show evidence of coercion and corruption related to today's interrupted wedding at St. Michael's Cathedral. We're joined now by legal analyst Rebecca Torres. Rebecca, what are we looking at here? Well, Maria, if these documents are authentic, and several independent sources are already confirming they appear to be, we're looking at potential criminal charges. Witness tampering, fabricating evidence, possibly even conspiracy. The Hale family has long been influential in this city, but this could be the beginning of serious legal consequences. The family has released a statement calling these allegations completely false, and a coordinated attack by a disgruntled former employee and an unstable woman seeking attention. How does that factor into this? It's a standard initial response, but the problem for the Hales is the documentation. We're not talking about he said, she said here. We're talking about emails, bank transfers, recorded conversations. That's much harder to dismiss as fabrication. Victor turned off the radio. We're in the news cycle now. That's good and bad. Good, because they can't make us disappear quietly. Bad, because his phone rang. He answered on speaker. Daniel's voice came through, tight with stress. Where are you? 20 minutes from the safe house. What's happening? The Hale legal team just filed a dozen motions. Defamation, invasion of privacy, theft of proprietary information. They're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. More importantly, they've hired Blackstone Security. Sarah sucked in a breath. Shit. Who's Blackstone Security? Lena asked. Private military contractors, Sarah said grimly. Very expensive, very good at finding people who don't want to be found. They operate in legal gray areas and have zero ethical concerns about methods. They can't just hire mercenaries to hunt us down, Lena protested. That's legal, Daniel interrupted. Barely, but yes. Blackstone will claim they're providing personal security and conducting a private investigation. What they actually do is intimidation, surveillance, and occasionally things that would get a police officer fired but that a private citizen can claim as self-defense or protection of assets. Victor's jaw clenched. How long until they locate the safe house? Hard to say. I'd give you 12 hours, maybe less. They're good, and they have resources. Then we need to move again. Lena, how are you holding up? She realized he was talking to her. All eyes, Sarah's in the rearview mirror, Victor's glancing over, were suddenly focused on her reaction. Lena paused. How was she? Terrified, yes. Overwhelmed, absolutely. But under that, something else. Something that felt almost like exhilaration. I'm angry. Good, Victor said. Angry is useful. Angry keeps you sharp. Angry also makes you reckless, Sarah countered. Lena, you need to be smart about this. The Hales are going to come at you with everything. They'll dig into your past, contact everyone you've ever known, try to find anything they can use to discredit you. You need to be prepared for that. I know. Do you? Because this isn't theoretical anymore. By tomorrow morning, your face will be on every news site. Strangers will have opinions about your character. People you went to high school with will be getting calls from reporters. Your entire life is about to be dissected in public. Lena thought about that. About her high school friends, most of whom she hadn't talked to in years. About her college roommate who'd probably sell an interview for $500. About every boss she'd ever had, every coworker who might remember her, every person who could be pressured or paid to say something damaging. Let them dig, she said finally. I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. But I didn't fabricate evidence or threaten innocent people or use my family's money to buy my way out of consequences. Whatever they find, it won't be worse than what we found about them. Daniel made a sound that might have been approval. That's the right attitude. We'll need to prep you for interviews, though. The media is going to want your side of the story. Absolutely not, Victor said. We're not putting her on camera until we have better security in place. We might not have a choice. The narrative is being written right now, and if Lena doesn't participate in shaping it, The Hales will control the story. They argued about it for the rest of the drive. By the time they reached the safe house, they'd reached an uneasy compromise. One interview, carefully controlled, with a journalist Daniel trusted. Tomorrow afternoon, before the restraining order hearing. Inside the cabin, they found Marcus waiting. Lena stopped dead in the doorway. Her brother stood by the fireplace, looking exhausted and confused and scared. When he saw her, his expression shifted to relief so profound it made her chest ache. "Lena," he breathed, crossing the room in 3 strides and pulling her into a crushing hug. "What the hell is going on? These people said I was in protective custody, that there were fake charges, that you—" He pulled back, searching her face. "Is it true? Did Adrian Hale threaten you?" Lena looked at Victor, who nodded slightly. "Permission to tell the truth." "Yes," she said. "He threatened to destroy you if I didn't marry him. The fraud charges were fabricated. All of it was designed to force me into compliance." Marcus's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: disbelief, anger, guilt. "You were going to marry someone you didn't love because of me?" "To protect you, yes." "That's... Lena, you can't... I wouldn't want that. You have to know I wouldn't want that." "I know. But it wasn't about what you wanted. It was about keeping you safe." She squeezed his arm. "You're my little brother. That's what I do." "By sacrificing yourself?" Marcus's voice cracked. "That's not protection, that's..." "Over now," Victor interjected quietly. "The charges are being dropped. Marcus, you're safe. That's what matters." Marcus turned to Victor, seeing him properly for the first time. "You're the guy from the cathedral, the one who stopped the wedding. Victor Moretti?" "Marcus Cross." They shook hands, Marcus's grip tight with barely controlled emotion. "Thank you. For whatever you did. Thank you. Thank your sister. She's the one who had the courage to say no." They spent the next hour catching Marcus up on everything. He listened with growing horror, interrupting occasionally to ask questions that got progressively angrier. "So this family just decided you were theirs?" Marcus demanded. "Just decided they could manipulate your entire life, and you were supposed to go along with it?" "That's how people like the Hales operate," Sarah said. She'd been quiet during most of the explanation, cleaning her gun with practiced efficiency. "They're used to buying outcomes. When that doesn't work, they escalate to threats. When threats don't work, they manufacture crises. How is that legal? It's not. But legality only matters if someone enforces it, and the Hales have spent decades making sure the people who would enforce it are either loyal or compromised." Marcus ran both hands through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made Lena's heart hurt. He'd done the same thing as a kid whenever homework got too frustrating. "What do we do now?" he asked. "We survive," Daniel said. He'd been on his laptop the whole time, monitoring news coverage and legal filings. "The Hales are going to try to outlast us. They'll drag this through courts, bleed us financially, wait for public attention to move on to the next scandal. Our job is to keep pressure on them, keep the story alive, and document every illegal thing they do in response." "That could take months," Lena said. "Years, possibly. This isn't a sprint." Lena sat down heavily on the sofa. "Years of this. Years of looking over her shoulder, of fighting legal battles, of being the woman who'd accused one of the city's most powerful families of crimes most people didn't want to believe happened." Marcus sat beside her. "We'll figure it out. Together. You shouldn't have to be part of this. Too late. I already am." He bumped his shoulder against hers the way he used to when they were kids sharing a too-small couch in their mother's apartment. "Besides, you think I'm letting you do this alone? After you nearly married that psychopath for me? Not a chance." Despite everything, Lena smiled. Sarah's phone rang. She answered, listened, then her expression went cold. "Say that again." Everyone in the room went quiet. "Understood. We're moving now." Sarah hung up. "That was my contact at the police department. Blackstone Security just filed a missing persons report on Lena. They're claiming Adrian is concerned for her welfare and asking for official assistance in locating her." "That's insane," Marcus said. "She's not missing. She left. Doesn't matter. It gives Blackstone legal cover to be searching for her. More importantly, it means they can coordinate with law enforcement. Every cop in the city is about to have Lena's photo and a story about how her worried fiancé just wants to make sure she's safe." "We need to go public with Lena's location," Daniel said. If she's not missing, they can't use that excuse. That defeats the purpose of a safe house, Victor countered. The safe house is already compromised. They'll find it within hours. Better to control the narrative. They argued strategies while Lena watched her phone continue to blow up with notifications. Someone had found her social media accounts, the sparse, rarely updated profiles she maintained out of professional obligation. People were leaving comments, some supportive, many cruel. Gold Digger got cold feet. She obviously wanted his money and freaked out when it got real. Why would someone like Adrian Hale need to force anyone to marry him? She's lying for attention. But also, I believe her. Rich men get away with everything. Look at those bruises in the photos. That's not consensual. The Hale family has done this before. My cousin worked for them and they destroyed her when she tried to speak up. Lena closed the apps, stopped looking. Other people's opinions couldn't help her now. I'll do the interview, she said, interrupting the argument. Tomorrow, before the hearing. I'll tell my story, show my face, make it clear I'm not missing or coerced or unstable. Then people can decide what they believe. Victor looked like he wanted to argue, but Daniel nodded. I'll set it up, but we do it on our terms, in a location we control, with security present. And I'll coach you, Sarah added. You need to know how to handle hostile questions, how to stay calm when they try to rattle you. When do we start? Sarah checked her watch. Now, we've got maybe 8 hours before that interview, and you need to be ready. They cleared the dining table and set up what Sarah called a media prep session. It felt like being back in school, except instead of math problems, Lena was being drilled on how to respond to questions designed to make her look unreliable. Did you ever tell Adrian you loved him? Sarah asked. Yes, in the beginning, before I knew what he was. The Hales will use that against you. They'll say you pursued the relationship willingly and changed your mind when you saw how much work being part of their family required. But that's not... Doesn't matter if it's true. Matters if it sounds plausible. Sarah paced while she talked, every inch the federal agent she used to be. You need to acknowledge the relationship started consensually but became coercive over time. You need specific examples of when that shift happened, dates if possible, events that witnesses might corroborate. Lena thought back. The first time I noticed something was wrong was at that dinner with his parents. Reginald asked me about my father. The one who left when you were 6? Yes. I told him honestly. My dad walked out. We never heard from him again. Reginald made this comment about how unfortunate genetics can be overcome with proper guidance. Like I was defective merchandise that could be improved. That's good. Use that. What did Adrian do? Nothing. Just sat there while his father insulted me. Afterward, in the car, I tried to talk about it, asked if he was going to let his family treat me that way. He said I was being oversensitive, that I needed to develop thicker skin if I wanted to survive in his world. Sarah nodded, typing notes. So the pattern establishes early. He brings you into his family's sphere, allows them to demean you, then frames your reaction as the problem rather than their behavior. What else? They went through incident after incident. The time Adrian had shown up at her office unannounced and been angry that she'd gone to lunch with a male co-worker. The weekend trip where he'd pressured her to skip her brother's birthday dinner because his family had planned something that conflicted. The moment she'd tried to break up with him and he'd responded by showing up at her apartment every day for a week until she agreed to work on things. Each memory felt like peeling back a layer of skin, exposing wounds she'd been trying to ignore. This is textbook escalation, Sarah said. Isolation, control, gaslighting. By the time he made the explicit threats about Marcus, you were already primed to comply. That's how abusers work. They don't start with violence. They start with small boundary violations and build from there. I should have seen it earlier. That's the wrong takeaway. You're not responsible for recognizing manipulation designed specifically to be unrecognizable. That's like blaming someone for getting pickpocketed by a professional thief. Marcus had been listening from the kitchen, making coffee no one was drinking. I didn't know any of this was happening, he said quietly. You never told me. Because I didn't want you to worry. I'm your brother. Worrying about you is literally my job. You had school and work and your whole life. I didn't want to make me feel guilty for living my life while yours was falling apart. Marcus's voice was sharper than usual. Lena, you can't protect me from everything. Sometimes you have to let me help. Before she could respond, Victor's phone rang again. He stepped outside to take it, and when he came back, his expression was grim. That was a contact at the network where tomorrow's interview is scheduled. The Hale's legal team just sent a cease and desist letter threatening a defamation suit if the interview airs. Can they do that? Lena asked. They can threaten it. Whether they'd win is another question, but the threat alone might be enough to scare the network into pulling the segment. Daniel was already typing furiously on his laptop. We'll counter with our own letter. Point out that preventing someone from telling their story about alleged crimes is itself newsworthy. Make it clear that backing down makes them look complicit. Will that work? Maybe. Networks are risk-averse, but they also hate being bullied. We'll find out in the next few hours. Lena felt exhaustion creeping in around the edges. It was past midnight now, and she'd been running on adrenaline since the ceremony. Her body was starting to remember it had limits. You need sleep, Sarah said, reading her expression. We all do. Marcus, you're in the second bedroom. Lena, you've got the third. Victor and Daniel are taking shifts on watch, and I'll be monitoring security feeds. If anything happens, we'll wake you. Lena wanted to argue, to stay up planning and preparing, but her body had other ideas. She made it to the bedroom Sarah had indicated and collapsed onto the bed fully clothed. Sleep came fast, dark, and dreamless. She woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee. Her phone showed 8:47 a.m. and 73 new notifications. She ignored them all and went to find the others. The cabin's main room looked like a war room. Someone had brought in a whiteboard covered in notes, timelines, connections between people and events. Daniel and Sarah were arguing over something while Victor typed on a laptop, and Marcus was making breakfast with the kind of focused intensity he usually reserved for exams. She's up, Marcus announced, plating scrambled eggs. Eat, you look like death. Good morning to you too. She ate mechanically while Sarah briefed her on the morning's developments. The network had agreed to air the interview despite the Hales' threats. 3 major news outlets were requesting exclusive stories. Social media sentiment was running about 60-40 in Lena's favor, with the 40% convinced she was a gold digger staging an elaborate con. The restraining order hearing is at 2, Daniel said. The interview is scheduled for 11. That gives us time to get you presentable and go over talking points one more time. Presentable? Sarah gestured to the bruises on Lena's wrist, now fading to yellow-green. Those need to be visible. The public needs to see physical evidence. We're also going to have you wear something simple, no makeup, minimal styling. The Hales will try to paint you as calculating and manipulative. We counter that by having you look as genuine and unpolished as possible. Lena understood the strategy but hated it anyway. Turn her trauma into a costume. Perform vulnerability for strangers who'd judge whether her pain was real enough to deserve sympathy. I know you hate this, Sarah said, reading her again. But optics matter. Fair or not, people make decisions based on what they see, and we need them to see someone telling the truth. They spent the next 2 hours preparing. Sarah coached Lena on body language. Maintain eye contact, but don't stare. Keep hands visible, but don't fidget. Pause before answering to show you're thinking rather than reciting. Daniel drilled her on legal boundaries, what she could say without creating liability, how to deflect questions about evidence that was still being processed. Victor mostly watched, offering occasional comments but largely staying quiet. When Marcus asked why, Victor shrugged. This isn't my area. I'm good at finding information and making strategic decisions, not media management. Sometimes the best thing you can do is trust the experts and stay out of the way. At 10:30, they loaded into 2 vehicles, Victor's car with Lena and Sarah, Daniel's rental with Marcus riding shotgun. They drove to a small production studio Daniel had rented for the interview, a nondescript building in an industrial area with good security and multiple exits. The journalist was waiting inside. Her name was Jennifer Wu, and she had the kind of sharp, assessing gaze that made Lena instantly nervous. Ms. Cross, Jennifer said, shaking her hand. Thank you for agreeing to this. I want you to know I take this seriously. No gotcha questions, no ambush topics. You tell your story, I ask for clarification when needed, and we let the audience decide what they believe. Okay. They sat in chairs positioned for the camera. Nothing fancy, just 2 people having a conversation. The lighting was soft, designed to be flattering without looking manipulative. Jennifer started with softballs, where Lena grew up, what she'd studied, how she'd ended up in the city, background that established her as a real person, not a character in a scandal. Then, when did you first meet Adrian Hale? And Lena started talking. She told the story she'd rehearsed, but tried to keep it feeling unrehearsed. The elevator meeting, the charming dates, the gradual revelation of who the Hale family really was. The dinner where Reginald had dissected her worth as a human being while his son sat silent. "When did you realize something was wrong?" Jennifer asked. "When I tried to break up with him and he showed me the folder on my brother. Evidence of crimes Marcus hadn't committed, but that looked convincing enough to destroy his life. That's when I understood this wasn't a relationship. It was a transaction." "What did you do?" "I said yes to the marriage. Because what else could I do? Let my brother go to prison for fraud he didn't commit? Watch his entire future disappear because I'd made the mistake of dating the wrong man?" Jennifer leaned forward slightly. "Some people are saying you pursued Adrian for his money and got cold feet when the reality of marrying into that family set in. How do you respond to that?" "I'd say look at my life before Adrian. I worked hard, paid my bills, built a career. I wasn't looking for a wealthy husband. I was looking for a partner. Someone who saw me as an equal." Lena met the camera's eye. "And I'd say look at the evidence, the emails between Reginald Hale and Judge Morrison, the bank transfers to witnesses in Marcus's case, the recordings of Adrian threatening me. That's not the behavior of a man whose girlfriend wanted his money. That's the behavior of someone who saw a person they could control and decided to own her." They talked for 40 minutes. Jennifer asked about the bruises, about the wedding, about what Lena hoped would happen next. "I want the truth to matter," Lena said. "I want people to understand that money and power don't give you the right to treat other people as objects. And I want anyone else in a situation like mine to know that saying no is possible. Hard, yes. Terrifying, absolutely. But possible." When the interview ended, Jennifer thanked her and promised the segment would air that evening. Sarah whisked Lena out of the studio and back into the car before anyone could approach for follow-up questions. "You did good," Sarah said as they drove. "Really good. Genuine, sympathetic, credible. I feel like I'm going to throw up." "That's normal. You just told your trauma to however many people will watch tonight. It's a lot." They made it back to the safe house with an hour to spare before the restraining order hearing. Lena changed into clothes Daniel had selected. Professional, but not expensive. The kind of outfit that said, responsible adult, without screaming trying too hard. At 1:45, they walked into the courthouse and found themselves facing a wall of cameras, reporters, and protesters carrying signs. Half the signs supported Lena. Believe survivors. Hell corruption. The truth matters. The other half called her a liar, a gold digger, a fraud. Sarah moved in front of Lena, creating a physical barrier as they pushed through the crowd. Daniel guided them toward the courthouse entrance while reporters shouted questions. "Ms. Cross, did you ever love Adrian Hale? Is this about money or revenge? Do you have any proof of your allegations beyond what Victor Moretti provided?" Lena kept her eyes forward and her mouth shut, the way Sarah had coached her. "Don't engage, don't react, don't give them anything that can be taken out of context." They made it inside and through security. The courtroom was smaller than Lena had expected, wood-paneled and formal. The Hales were already there with their legal team, 6 lawyers in expensive suits, all radiating the kind of confidence that came from never having lost. Adrian sat between his parents, looking haggard. When he saw Lena, his expression cycled through relief, anger, and something that might have been genuine hurt before settling on blank composure. Reginald stared at her with undisguised contempt. Catherine looked away entirely, as if Lena's existence was too painful to acknowledge. The judge entered. A woman in her 60s named Harriet Kim, who, according to Daniel, had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense from either side. "We're here on the matter of Hale versus Cross," Judge Kim said, looking over her reading glasses at both parties. "I've reviewed the filings. Mr. Hale is seeking a restraining order against Ms. Cross, claiming she's dangerous and unstable. Ms. Cross is contesting this. Let's proceed." The Hale's lead attorney stood. His name was Marcus Wellington. Daniel had warned her about him, called him a shark in a suit. "Your Honor, my client Adrian Hale has been subjected to harassment, defamation, and emotional distress by Ms. Cross. Yesterday, she created a public spectacle by abandoning him at their wedding after months of planning. Since then, she has coordinated with known associates to release private information and has demonstrated erratic behavior suggesting she may pose a danger to herself or others." Judge Kim looked unimpressed. And your evidence of this danger is? Wellington presented a folder. Psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Richard Morrison suggesting Ms. Cross has borderline personality disorder and a history of unstable relationships. Character witness statements from individuals who've known Ms. Cross and observed concerning patterns of behavior. Documentation of the substantial investment Mr. Hale's family made in planning the wedding that Ms. Cross destroyed for what appears to be attention-seeking purposes. Daniel stood. Your Honor, may I respond? Please. Dr. Morrison is Reginald Hale's personal physician and has never met my client. The evaluation is based entirely on secondhand information provided by the Hale family. The character witnesses are employees of Hale subsidiaries who were paid to provide statements, and the wedding was not an investment. It was a trap. My client was being coerced into marriage through threats against her brother. You have evidence of these threats? Substantial evidence, Your Honor, which is currently being reviewed by the District Attorney's Office as part of an investigation into the Hale family's business practices. Wellington jumped in. That investigation is based on stolen documents and hearsay. Nothing has been verified. The documents are being verified as we speak, and they show a pattern of corruption that makes Mr. Hale's claim of victimization laughable. Judge Kim held up a hand. Gentlemen, let's not turn this into a circus. Ms. Cross, I'd like to hear from you directly. Why did you leave Mr. Hale at the altar? Lena stood, her legs shaking but her voice steady. Because he was blackmailing me, Your Honor. He fabricated criminal charges against my brother and told me the only way to make them disappear was to marry him. I went along with it because I was terrified and didn't see another option. But when Victor Moretti showed up with evidence that my brother's charges were fake, I realized I could say no. So I did. You're saying Mr. Hale threatened you? Yes, Your Honor, multiple times. I have bruises from the last time he grabbed me. I have recordings of some of the threats. And I have a journal documenting the pattern of control and abuse that led up to the wedding. Wellington scoffed. A journal conveniently produced after the fact, recordings that could easily be fabricated. This is a woman scorned making up stories to justify her behavior. If I'm lying, Lena said, surprising herself with how calm she sounded, then why did Adrian break into my apartment last night? Why is his family hiring military contractors to hunt me down? Why are they so desperate to silence me if everything I'm saying is false? The courtroom went very quiet. Judge Kim looked at Wellington. Is your client hiring private security to locate Ms. Cross? For her own safety, yes. We're concerned. That's a yes or no question, Counselor. Yes, Your Honor, but only because Ms. Cross disappeared without... She's an adult woman who chose to leave a relationship. That's not disappearing. That's exercising autonomy. Judge Kim turned to Daniel. Your evidence. I want to see it. All of it. Now. Daniel handed over a thick folder. Judge Kim spent several minutes reading through it, her expression growing progressively darker. Finally, she looked up. Mr. Wellington, your client's petition for a restraining order is denied. Furthermore, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order against Adrian Hale and his family members, prohibiting them from contacting Ms. Cross or her brother in any way while this matter is investigated. Wellington's face went red. Your Honor, that's completely warranted, given what I'm seeing in these documents. We're adjourned. She stood and left the courtroom before anyone could argue further. For a moment, no one moved. Then Adrian lunged across the courtroom toward Lena. Sarah intercepted him before he made it halfway across the aisle. She didn't draw her weapon, couldn't, not in a courthouse, but her stance alone stopped Adrian cold. Hands up, ready, the kind of posture that promised consequences. Don't, Sarah said quietly. Adrian's face was twisted with something beyond anger, desperation maybe, or the dawning realization that the world didn't work the way he'd always believed it did. Lena, please. His voice cracked. Just talk to me. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. You heard the judge, Daniel said, stepping between them. No contact means no contact. I'm not going to hurt her. I just need to explain. Explain what? Marcus appeared at Lena's other side, and she realized her brother had been quiet this whole time, watching, waiting. Now his voice carried across the courtroom with the kind of cold fury she'd never heard from him before. How you threatened my life. How you put bruises on my sister. What exactly needs explaining? Wellington grabbed Adrian's arm, pulling him back. Mr. Hale, we need to leave, now. But Adrian jerked away from his lawyer, his eyes locked on Lena's face. You don't understand. My father, he has plans. Things in motion that you can't stop by embarrassing us in court. This restraining order doesn't protect you. It just makes you a bigger target. Is that a threat? Sarah asked. It's a warning. There's a difference. Adrian's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. I didn't want any of this. I just wanted control, Lena finished. You wanted control. Over me, over the situation, over how your life looked from the outside. But you don't get to have that anymore. You're making a mistake. No, I made a mistake when I believed you were a good person underneath all the manipulation. This, walking away, fighting back, this is me fixing it. Reginald Hale stood, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He hadn't spoken since the judge's ruling, but now his voice carried the weight of decades of getting exactly what he wanted. Ms. Cross, he said, each syllable precise and cold, you've won a small battle today. Enjoy it. Because the war you've started will consume everything you care about. Your brother's career prospects, your own employability, every relationship you value. By the time my family is finished, you'll wish you'd said yes at that altar. Is he seriously making threats in a courthouse? Marcus muttered. Observations, not threats, Reginald corrected smoothly. Simply pointing out the natural consequences of declaring war on people with resources. Actions have repercussions, Ms. Cross. You'll learn that soon enough. Judge Kim's clerk appeared in the doorway, looking irritated. The judge says if everyone isn't out of this courtroom in the next 60 seconds, she's holding you all in contempt. Wellington gathered his team with brisk efficiency, herding the Hales toward the exit. Catherine went first, her face a mask of composed fury. Reginald followed, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. Adrian lingered, staring at Lena like he could change reality through sheer force of will. Adrian, Wellington snapped, now. He went, but not before saying one last thing. I loved you. Whatever you think about everything else, that part was real. Then he was gone, and Lena was left standing in an empty courtroom trying to figure out if that last statement made anything better or worse. We need to move, Sarah said, already checking exits. The reporters outside will have heard the ruling by now. It'll be chaos. She was right. The crowd had doubled in the 40 minutes they'd been inside, and now everyone wanted a statement. Cameras flashed as they pushed through, Daniel running interference while Sarah created a path. Ms. Cross, how do you feel about the ruling? Will you be pressing criminal charges? Do you regret calling off the wedding? Lena kept her mouth shut until they reached the car. Once inside with the doors locked and Sarah driving, she finally allowed herself to breathe. That went well, Marcus said from the back seat, his voice shaking slightly. I mean, comparatively, we're not dead or arrested, so that's something. It's more than something, Daniel said, already typing on his phone. Judge Kim's ruling gives us legal cover. The Hales can't claim you're harassing them anymore. And the temporary restraining order means they have to maintain distance while the investigation proceeds. Reginald's threats didn't sound very distant. Made in front of witnesses. We're documenting everything. Daniel held up his phone. I recorded the whole exchange. If they come after you now, it establishes premeditation. Victor called as they merged onto the highway. Sarah put him on speaker. The interview's airing in 20 minutes, Victor said without preamble. Advanced clips are already going viral. You're trending on 3 platforms. Is that good? Lena asked. It's loud, which right now is better than good. The more public this becomes, the harder it is for the Hales to make you disappear. A pause. How did the hearing go? Daniel filled him in while Sarah navigated traffic, taking a route that zigzagged through side streets, checking for tails, Lena realized, making sure no one was following. Judge Kim denied their restraining order and issued one against them, Daniel finished. Reginald made some thinly veiled threats, but nothing actionable. Yet. He'll escalate, Victor said. Men like that don't accept losses. They reframe them as temporary setbacks and then come back harder. So what do? We beat them to the escalation. I've got people digging into Hale Industries' business practices, financial records, employee complaints, environmental violations, anything that patterns with the coercion tactics they used on you. Won't that take months to investigate? Marcus asked. Normally, yes, but I've been working on this for weeks already, since before the wedding. I knew we'd need ammunition beyond what happened to Lena personally. Victor's voice had that focused quality it got when he was problem-solving. The interview tonight will keep public attention high. Tomorrow we start releasing the business corruption evidence. Keep the pressure constant so they're always responding instead of attacking. Lena leaned her head against the car window, watching the city slide past. This is really happening. We're actually fighting them. You started it when you said no at that altar, Sarah said. Everything since then has just been follow-through. They made it back to the safe house without incident. Inside, Victor had set up multiple laptops, all streaming different news channels. Lena's face was on half of them. Your interview starts in 5 minutes, Victor said, gesturing to the main screen. You should probably watch. Or not. Some people prefer not to see themselves on TV. I'll watch, Lena decided. If she was going to be dissected in public, she should at least know what was being said. The segment opened with a recap of yesterday's interrupted wedding, complete with photos that made Lena's stomach clench. She looked terrified in those images. How had she thought no one would notice? Then Jennifer Wu appeared on screen, sitting across from Lena in that studio. The Lena on TV looked small and tired and painfully young. When did you realize something was wrong? Jennifer's voice, gentle but probing. And then Lena was talking, telling her story to however many people were watching. She'd thought she sounded articulate during the interview, but now all she heard was the tremor in her voice when she talked about the threats to Marcus, the way her hands twisted in her lap when Jennifer asked about the bruises. Turn it off, Marcus said suddenly. You don't need to watch yourself relive that. But Lena couldn't look away. She watched herself explain how the Hales had manufactured evidence, how Adrian had used her love for her brother as a weapon, how she'd felt trapped and terrified and completely alone. I want the truth to matter, TV Lena said, looking directly at the camera. I want people to understand that money and power don't give you the right to treat other people as objects. The segment ended with Jennifer's summary and a note that the Hale family had declined to comment. For a moment, no one in the safe house spoke. Then Sarah's phone rang. She answered, listened, and her expression shifted from neutral to alarmed. When? She asked. How many? A pause. Understood. We're moving now. She hung up and started grabbing equipment. That was my contact at the police department. Blackstone Security just filed a wellness check request on this address. They're claiming anonymous tips about potential danger to occupants. It's a pretense to force police to the location, which gives Blackstone legal cover to be here too. How did they find us? Victor demanded. Doesn't matter right now. They'll be here in under 20 minutes. We need to be gone in 5. Everyone moved. Lena had gotten good at packing quickly. Everything she needed fit in a backpack now. Laptop, charger, the journal, spare clothes, toiletries. The essentials of a life on the run. They loaded into 2 vehicles again, Victor driving one, Sarah the other. This time Marcus rode with Lena and Victor while Daniel stayed with Sarah. Where are we going? Lena asked as Victor pulled onto a dirt road that barely qualified as a road. Somewhere they won't think to look. Friend of mine has a place upstate, off the grid literally. No utilities, no address, no paper trail. How long can we stay there? As long as we need to. But Lena, we need to talk about endgame here. Victor's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, checking for followers. The Hales aren't going to stop. Even with the public pressure, even with the investigation, they're going to keep coming. So we need to decide, are we playing defense or are we going on offense? Marcus leaned forward from the back seat. What does offense look like? It looks like not waiting for them to attack. It looks like finding every piece of dirt on the Hale family and releasing it systematically until their reputation is so damaged that coming after you becomes more costly than cutting their losses. That could take years, Lena said. Could take weeks if we're strategic about it. I've got files on Hale Industries going back a decade. Illegal campaign contributions, environmental dumping, labor violations, bribery. None of it reaches Reginald directly, but it establishes a pattern. Add in what they did to you, and we can build a narrative that makes the whole family toxic. Lena thought about that, about taking the fight to them instead of constantly running. What do we need to make that work? Your testimony for one. You're the human face of this story, the person who makes it real instead of abstract. But we also need corroboration. Other victims, if we can find them. Employees willing to talk. Anyone the Hales have hurt who's ready to stop being quiet. Victor's sister, Lena said quietly. You said the Hales destroyed her career. Were there others in that same situation? People who tried to speak up and got crushed? Victor's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Probably. Catherine worked for a Hale subsidiary, Meridian Pharmaceuticals. When she found the fraud evidence, she reported it to her supervisor, who reported it to corporate, who reported it to Reginald. Within a week, she was fired for performance issues and blacklisted in the industry. But she wasn't the only person who knew about the fraud, Lena pressed. There had to be other employees who saw the same evidence. There were, but none of them spoke up after they saw what happened to Catherine. Maybe they'd speak up now. With the spotlight already on the Hales, with public opinion shifting, maybe those people would be willing to come forward if they knew they weren't alone. Victor considered this. It's possible. Worth trying anyway. I still have Catherine's files, names of people she worked with, documentation of what she found. We could reach out, see who's willing to talk. Do it, Lena said. If we're going on offense, let's actually do it. Find everyone the Hales have ever hurt and give them a chance to be heard. They drove for another hour, eventually turning onto a road so overgrown Lena wasn't sure how Victor even knew it was there. The cabin that appeared through the trees looked less like a house and more like a hunting shack, small, weathered, surrounded by dense forest. This is it? Marcus asked dubiously. This is it. No internet, no cell service, and the nearest neighbor is 6 miles away. We've got a generator for power and a well for water. It's not comfortable, but it's secure. Sarah's car pulled up behind them. She got out, surveyed the location, and nodded approval. Good. Defensible position, limited approach routes. I can set up a perimeter alarm system that'll give us warning if anyone gets within a quarter mile. Inside, the cabin was exactly as advertised, basic and functional. 2 bedrooms, a bathroom with questionable plumbing, a main room with a wood stove and a table. No TV, no phone, nothing that connected to the outside world. We'll stay here while we regroup, Victor said, setting his laptop on the table. I've got satellite internet that should work even out here. Daniel can coordinate legal strategy, Sarah handles security, and I'll work on finding former Hale employees willing to testify. What about me? Lena asked. You rest. And you prepare. Because when we go public with the next phase, you're going to be the face of it. That means more interviews, more testimony, more of your life dissected in public. Lena sat down heavily on a chair that creaked under her weight. I don't know if I can do this. Yes, you can, Marcus said immediately. I've watched you do impossible things my whole life. This is just one more. This is different. This is what Mom did for us when Dad left. When she worked 3 jobs to keep us fed and housed and in school, when everyone said she should give up, put us in foster care, admit she couldn't handle it alone. Marcus crouched beside her chair, meeting her eyes. She didn't quit because quitting wasn't an option. Same as you right now. The Hales gave you a choice, submit or fight. You chose fight. Now you just have to keep choosing it. Lena wanted to argue, but he was right. Their mother had modeled this exact thing, deciding that impossible didn't mean optional. Sarah finished her security sweep and came back inside. Perimeters set. Motion sensors on all approaches, cameras covering the main access points. If anyone comes within range, we'll know. How long can we stay here before Blackstone finds us? Lena asked. Hard to say. This place isn't in Victor's name, isn't connected to any of us through any digital footprint I can find. But Blackstone is good. They'll be running analysis on Victor's associates, cross-referencing property records, checking satellite imagery. I'd give us 3 days, maybe 4. Then we make those days count, Victor said. He opened his laptop and pulled up a file directory with dozens of folders. These are the Hale Industries investigations I mentioned. Financial crimes, environmental violations, labor abuses. Each folder has evidence, but most of it's technical. We need someone to make it accessible to regular people. I can help with that, Marcus offered. I'm good at taking complex information and making it understandable. That's basically what teaching is. You're not a teacher, Lena pointed out. Not yet, but I'm a TA, and I've run enough study sessions to know how to break down complicated topics. He pulled over another laptop. Show me what you've got. They fell into a rhythm over the next several hours. Victor and Marcus worked on documenting the Hale Industries crimes in ways that would resonate with the public. Sarah monitored security feeds and made supply runs to a town 20 miles away. Daniel coordinated remotely with prosecutors who were starting to take the investigation seriously now that public pressure demanded it. Lena tried to help but found herself mostly watching, feeling useless. Her story had set this in motion. But now that the machine was running, she didn't know where she fit. "You're doing it again," Victor said without looking up from his screen. "Doing what?" "Thinking you're not contributing. You are. Your willingness to keep talking, to keep being visible. That's what makes all this other work matter. Without you, this is just data. With you, it's a story people care about. I'm tired of being a story." "I know, but you're the only one who can tell it." He finally looked at her, his expression softer than usual. "If you want to step back, we can work around it. Find other approaches. But it'll be harder and take longer, and there's no guarantee it'll work." Lena understood what he wasn't saying. She was the weapon they had, and she could either use it or watch them fight with less effective tools. "What's the next step?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning, we release the first batch of Hale Industries documents. Environmental dumping at a facility in Ohio. Falsified safety reports, bribed inspectors, contaminated groundwater affecting 3 towns. It's well documented and unambiguous." "How does that help us?" "It shifts the narrative. Right now, the story is about you and Adrian, a personal dispute people can interpret different ways. But corporate malfeasance that poison drinking water? That's unambiguous villainy. It makes people question everything else the Hales claim." Marcus looked up from his laptop. "I've been going through the employment records from Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Catherine wasn't the only person who got fired after reporting problems. There's a pattern, at least 8 employees over 6 years who raised concerns about fraud or safety and were terminated within months." "Can we find them?" Lena asked. "I've got names and last known addresses. Whether they're willing to talk is another question." "Let me reach out," Lena said, "person to person, not through lawyers or investigators. If I tell them my story, maybe they'll feel safe enough to tell theirs." Victor looked skeptical. "That's a lot of emotional labor. Are you sure you're up for it?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." They worked until past midnight, building a strategy that felt less like a legal case and more like a military campaign. Release evidence in waves. Keep the Hales responding instead of attacking. Find allies among their former victims. Control the narrative through sheer volume of truth. Lena fell asleep on the couch, too tired to make it to one of the bedrooms. She woke to Sarah shaking her shoulder and pale dawn light filtering through dirty windows. "We've got a problem," Sarah said quietly. Lena sat up, heart already racing. "What kind of problem?" "Come look." Sarah led her to a laptop showing a news website. The headline made Lena's stomach drop. "Hale family hires crisis management firm, prepares defamation lawsuit against accusers." The article detailed how the Hales had retained Marshall and Locke, a firm known for destroying the credibility of people who accused powerful clients of wrongdoing. Their tactics included digging up embarrassing personal information, pressuring employers and friends, and filing lawsuits designed to bankrupt targets through legal fees even if they didn't win. "They're going scorched earth," Sarah said. "This firm doesn't play defense. They attack until the other side gives up." "Can they actually do that? Just hire people to destroy us?" "It's legal. Unethical, but legal." Sarah pulled up another tab showing Marshall and Locke's website. "They've represented senators, CEOs, celebrities. Their win rate is something like 90% because most people can't afford to fight them long enough to actually win." "But we're not most people." "No. We've got Victor's money and Daniel's expertise and public sympathy, but Marshall and Locke specializes in eroding all 3. They'll find your weaknesses and exploit them until public sympathy turns to doubt, Daniel gets buried in paperwork, and even Victor's resources start looking insufficient." Lena read through the article, her dread growing with each paragraph. The firm had already started working. The article quoted anonymous sources, claiming Lena had a history of manipulating men for financial gain, that she'd been fired from previous jobs for dishonesty, that her brother had a juvenile record she'd never disclosed. None of it was true. But it didn't have to be true to be effective. "They're going to make me into a villain," Lena said quietly. "They're going to try. Whether they succeed depends on how we respond." Sarah closed the laptop. "Get dressed. We're having a war council." 20 minutes later, everyone gathered around the table. Victor had already read the article and looked grimly unsurprised. "Marshall and Locke," he said. "I should have anticipated this. They're the Hales nuclear option." "Can we countersue?" Marcus asked. "For defamation or something?" "We could, but it's what they want. Ties us up in litigation for years while they keep attacking through unofficial channels." Daniel rubbed his eyes, looking exhausted. The better strategy is to stay focused on the criminal investigation. Let the prosecutors handle the Hales while we keep public opinion on our side. Hard to keep public opinion when they're paying people to lie about us, Lena pointed out. Then we give the public something they can't ignore, something so undeniable that the lies become obvious. Victor pulled up a file on his laptop. The environmental dumping I mentioned yesterday. I've got internal memos where Reginald personally authorized disposal of chemicals in violation of EPA regulations. His signature, his instructions, no ambiguity. Release it today, Sarah said, before Marshall and Locke can establish their narrative about Lena being unstable. Make the story about Reginald being criminal. It's risky. Once we release it, the Hales will know exactly what evidence we have. They can start building their defense. They're already building their defense, Lena said, by attacking us. We might as well give people a reason to question whether the attackers are credible. Victor looked at Daniel, who considered for a long moment before nodding. Do it, but we coordinate with the prosecutors first. Make sure releasing this publicly doesn't compromise their investigation. The next hours were a blur of phone calls and strategy sessions. Daniel spoke with the assistant DA handling the case, who grudgingly agreed that releasing the environmental evidence wouldn't damage their prosecution, might even help by putting pressure on the Hales to cooperate. By noon, Victor had prepared a comprehensive document dump, photos of the contaminated groundwater, internal Hale Industries memos, testimony from residents of the affected towns describing health problems and property damage. And at the center of it all, Reginald Hale's signature on orders to dispose of toxic waste in ways he knew were illegal. Once this goes live, there's no taking it back, Victor warned. The Hales will come at us with everything. Legal action, private investigators, possibly physical intimidation. Everyone needs to be clear about what we're signing up for. I'm clear, Lena said. Me too, Marcus added. Sarah and Daniel both nodded. Victor uploaded the documents to a secure server, then sent links to major news outlets and environmental advocacy groups. Within minutes, the phone started ringing. Lena watched the story spread in real time. First on Twitter, where environmental activists began sharing the documents with hashtags like #HaleToxic and #PoisonedForProfit. Then news sites picked it up, running headlines that screamed corporate malfeasance. By mid-afternoon, it was the top story on 3 major networks. The public reaction was visceral. People who'd been skeptical of Lena's abuse allegations found it easier to believe that a family willing to poison towns would also be willing to coerce a woman into marriage. The narrative shifted from personal drama to systemic corruption. Marshall and Locke tried to counter with a statement claiming the documents were taken out of context, but they were fighting uphill now. The contaminated groundwater was real. The sick children in those towns were real. Reginald's signature was real. It's working, Marcus said, scrolling through social media. Public opinion is turning. People are connecting the dots. If the Hales did this to strangers, why wouldn't they do what Lena said they did to her? But Sarah was watching something else on her screen, and her expression made Lena nervous. What is it? Lena asked. Blackstone Security just posted an update on their investigation into your disappearance. They're claiming they've received credible threats against your safety and are working with local law enforcement to ensure your well-being. Sarah turned the laptop so everyone could see. It's a pretense. They're trying to frame this as a rescue operation so they can justify aggressive tactics in finding you. Can they do that? They're doing it. Whether it holds up legally is irrelevant if they find us first. As if on cue, the perimeter alarms started beeping. Sarah was on her feet instantly, pulling up camera feeds. We've got 4 vehicles approaching from the East Access Road. 2 SUVs, 2 sedans. They're moving slow, searching. Blackstone? Victor asked. Has to be. Police wouldn't approach in formation like that. Sarah started grabbing gear. We've got maybe 5 minutes before they reach the cabin. We need to be gone in 3. They moved with practiced efficiency now, everyone grabbing their essentials and heading for the vehicles. Sarah had anticipated this, had parked both cars facing west, ready for quick departure. But as they emerged from the cabin, Lena saw headlights appearing on the western road too. They were boxed in. New plan, Sarah said, her voice deadly calm. We go north on foot. There's a trail about 200 yards into the forest. Leads to a logging road where we can call for extraction. Call who? Marcus demanded. People I know. People who owe me favors. Sarah pulled out a satellite phone and started dialing while leading them into the trees. Stay close, stay quiet, and if I tell you to run, you run. They crashed through underbrush, moving as quickly as possible while trying to stay silent. Behind them, Lena heard car doors slamming, voices calling out in military-style coordination. The Blackstone team was professional. They'd found the cabin faster than expected, approached from multiple directions, and were now executing what sounded like a building clearance operation. Keep moving, Sarah hissed, pushing them deeper into the forest. The terrain got rougher. Lena stumbled over roots she couldn't see in the darkness under the tree canopy. Marcus caught her arm, keeping her upright. How much further? Victor asked, breathing hard. Another 100 yards to the trail, then half a mile to the logging road. Sarah paused, listening. They found the cabin empty. They'll start a search pattern any second. As if she'd summoned them, flashlight beams began sweeping through the trees behind them. There, someone shouted. Movement northwest. Run, Sarah said. Now. They ran. Lena had never been athletic. She'd always been the kid who hated gym class, who found excuses to avoid physical activity. But fear was a hell of a motivator. She ran like her life depended on it, because it probably did. The trail Sarah had mentioned appeared, barely visible, overgrown, but passable. They followed it uphill, lungs burning, legs screaming. Behind them, the pursuit continued. The Blackstone team was gaining. They were trained for this, equipped for this, while Lena and her group were just civilians running on adrenaline. I can't, Marcus gasped. I can't keep this pace. You can, Sarah said, not even breathing hard. Because the alternative is letting them catch us. And trust me, you don't want that. A shot rang out. Everyone hit the ground instinctively. Lena's face pressed into dirt and dead leaves, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break her ribs. Warning shot, Sarah assessed. They're trying to scare us into stopping. Stay low. Keep moving. They crawled forward until the terrain provided cover, then resumed running in a crouch. The logging road finally appeared, 2 dirt ruts cutting through the forest, barely wide enough for a truck. Sarah's phone buzzed. She answered, listened, then pointed south. Quarter mile that direction, vehicle waiting. They ran again, staying in the tree line rather than the exposed road. The Blackstone team's voices were closer now, coordinated and methodical. Then Lena saw it. A beat-up pickup truck with its lights off, engine running. A woman in her 50s sat behind the wheel, looking bored despite the obvious danger. Sarah Chen, the woman said as they piled into the truck bed, you really know how to throw a party. Drive, Rita. Questions later. Rita threw the truck into gear and took off down the logging road at a speed that seemed suicidal given the terrain. Lena clung to the side rail, watching flashlight beams appear where they'd just been. The truck bounced and lurched for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. Finally, Rita pulled onto a paved highway and accelerated to a normal speed. Sarah climbed into the cab through the back window, a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible but somehow was. Where are we going? Victor called from the truck bed. Somewhere better than here, Rita answered. Your friends made me curious, started looking into the Hale family myself. Turns out I don't like what I found. Who are you? Lena asked. Rita glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Someone who knows what it's like to get crushed by people with money and power. And someone who's done being quiet about it. Rita drove for another hour before pulling into what looked like an abandoned farm. The barn was half collapsed, the house boarded up. But when she led them inside, Lena discovered the building had been converted into something else entirely. A makeshift operations center with computers, filing cabinets, and walls covered in newspaper clippings. Welcome to my retirement project, Rita said, flipping on lights that revealed the full scope of what she'd built. 20 years tracking corporate crimes that nobody wants to prosecute. The Hales are just one file in a very large collection. Victor was already examining the walls, his expression shifting from surprise to something approaching awe. This is incredible. How long have you been doing this? Since my daughter died from cancer caused by chemicals her employer illegally dumped. Same employer that paid off doctors to say it was genetic, paid off lawyers to drag the case out until I ran out of money, paid off judges to dismiss what was left. Rita poured herself coffee from a pot that looked like it had been sitting there for days. I decided if the system wouldn't hold them accountable, I'd at least make sure someone remembered what they did. Rita Walsh, Sarah said, and it clicked into place for Lena. The Walsh environmental case. You sued Chemtech Industries back in the 90s. And lost everything trying. My husband left, my friends stopped calling, my employers suddenly discovered I wasn't a good fit. Classic playbook. Rita gestured to the walls. But losing taught me something useful. You can't beat these people by playing their game. You have to change the rules entirely. How? Lena asked. By making it impossible for them to operate in the shadows. By connecting dots that powerful people spent millions keeping separate. By building networks of people they've hurt until there's too many of us to silence. Rita pulled out a file box marked Hale Industries. I've been tracking them since 2008. Started when they bought a pharmaceutical company my niece worked for, and immediately started cutting corners on drug testing. Marcus was at the wall now, reading through clippings. These are all companies owned by Hale Industries? Owned, controlled, or financially connected to. The Hales are good at using shell corporations and subsidiaries to hide their involvement, but money leaves trails if you know how to look. Rita opened the file box, revealing years of documentation. Environmental violations, labor abuses, fraud, bribery, pick your crime, they've committed it. Problem is, each incident looks like a one-off mistake. Nobody connects them into a pattern. Until now, Victor said quietly. He was looking at Rita like he'd found something he'd been searching for. You're the missing piece. We have recent evidence, but your historical documentation proves this isn't new behavior. It's systemic. Exactly. And I'm not the only one collecting this stuff. Rita pulled up a database on one of her computers. There's a whole network of us, people who got crushed by corporations and decided to spend whatever time we have left making sure the truth survives somewhere. Can we use this? Daniel asked. He'd been quiet during the drive, working on his laptop even as the truck bounced over logging roads. Legally, I mean. Is any of this admissible? Depends on how it was obtained. Most of it's public record, court filings, environmental reports, newspaper archives. Some of it's from leaks, which gets murkier. But admissible or not, it's documentation. Rita pulled up files showing a map with dozens of marked locations. Every red pin is a Hale Industries facility with documented violations. Every blue pin is a person who tried to speak up and got destroyed for it. I've got 47 red pins and 72 blue pins. That's a pattern no jury can ignore. Lena stared at the map, feeling something shift in her understanding. She'd thought she was just one person fighting one powerful family. But Rita's wall proved something different. She was the latest in a long line of people who'd tried to stop the Hales and failed. Why didn't you release this before? Marcus asked. Because alone, I'm just a crazy old woman with a vendetta. The Hales would discredit me in 5 minutes, and all this work would be dismissed as the ravings of someone who couldn't accept that bad things sometimes happen. Rita looked at Lena. But you're not alone. You've got Victor's resources, Sarah's expertise, Daniel's legal knowledge, public sympathy. And now you've got my documentation. Together, we're not so easy to dismiss. Sarah's phone buzzed. She checked it, and her expression tightened. Blackstone posted an update. They're claiming we're armed and dangerous, that they're working with the FBI to locate us. The FBI? Marcus's voice pitched higher. We're not terrorists, we're just inconvenient, Rita finished. That's all it takes. The Hales make a call, someone at the bureau who owes them a favor takes an interest, and suddenly you're a manhunt instead of victims. Can they actually do that? Lena asked. They already are doing it. Whether it's legitimate is a different question. Daniel was typing furiously. I'm reaching out to contacts at the Justice Department. If the FBI is involved, we need to know if it's official or if someone's running an off-books favor for the Hales. Victor's phone rang. He answered, listened for a moment, then his face went pale. When? A pause. How bad? Another pause. Understood. I'm on my way. He hung up and stood. There's been an incident at my office. Someone broke in, destroyed servers, stole files. The police are calling it a burglary, but the only things taken were documents related to the Hale investigation. They're destroying evidence, Sarah said. Not just destroying. They took my sister's files. Everything Catherine collected about the Meridian Pharmaceuticals fraud. The original documents that started this whole investigation. Lena saw the barely controlled fury in Victor's expression. Those files were all you had left of her. Yes. And now they're gone. Victor grabbed his jacket. I need to get back to the city. Assess the damage, see what we can recover. It's a trap, Sarah said immediately. They break into your office, you rush back, and Blackstone grabs you. Classic misdirection. I don't care if it's a trap. Those files can't be replaced. Then we all go, Lena said. Together. They can't grab all of us at once. They can try. But Sarah was already planning. Lena could see it in her eyes. Rita, can you get us into the city without using main roads? Somewhere Blackstone won't have coverage? I can get you to within 2 blocks of anywhere you want to go. After that, you're on your own. They loaded back into Rita's truck, this time with Rita's files added to their gear. The drive back to the city took 3 hours, using routes that seemed designed to avoid every major highway and well-lit area. I spent a lot of time learning how to move without being noticed, Rita explained when Marcus asked about the route. When you're fighting people with infinite resources, invisibility is your best weapon. They reached the city just after midnight. Victor's office building was in the financial district, all glass and steel and professional silence at this hour. Police tape blocked the entrance, and 2 officers stood guard. There's a service entrance on the east side, Victor said. Requires a key card, but I've got one. The police will have secured all entrances, Sarah pointed out. Not that one. It's technically part of the adjacent building, but there's a connector hallway. Most people don't know it exists. They parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot. The service entrance was exactly where Victor said, hidden behind a dumpster in an alley that smelled like old garbage and regret. Victor's keycard worked. They slipped inside, moving quickly through the connector hallway and up a service stairwell. Victor's office was on the 14th floor, high enough to be inconvenient, low enough that Lena's legs were screaming by the time they reached it. The destruction was worse than Lena had imagined. Servers had been physically destroyed, hard drives removed, filing cabinets emptied, papers littered the floor, and someone had spray-painted over Victor's evidence board, obscuring months of work. Victor stood in the doorway, staring at the wreckage of his investigation. His hands were clenched at his sides, and Lena could see him physically restraining himself from something. Anger, grief, maybe both. Catherine's files, he said finally. Where were they? He crossed to a safe in the wall, the door hanging open, the interior empty. They knew the combination, Victor said, his voice hollow. Or they brought someone who could crack it. Either way, those files are gone. What was in them? Daniel asked. Everything. Her research notes, internal Meridian documents, witness statements, correspondence with the FDA. Proof that the Hales knowingly approved drugs that failed safety testing because pulling them would cost too much money. Victor turned to face them. Those drugs killed people. 16 documented deaths, possibly more. Catherine had the evidence to prove it, and now it's gone. Marcus was examining the spray paint on the evidence board. This is weird. They destroyed everything else, but they defaced this instead of just taking it down. Why? He started scraping at the paint with his fingernail. Under the black spray paint, the original notes were still visible. Faint, but there. They wanted you to know they'd been here, Sarah said. Wanted you to see the destruction. It's psychological warfare. Or they wanted us to think the evidence was destroyed when it wasn't, Marcus countered. He'd moved to the filing cabinets now, checking drawers. Victor, did you keep backups? Of course. Multiple locations, encrypted servers, physical copies, and secure storage. So this whole break-in accomplished nothing except making a mess and stealing files you can replace. Marcus pulled out a drawer that had been labeled Meridian Personnel, which means either they're stupid or this wasn't about the files at all. It was about me, Victor realized. About making me rush back here, making me emotional and careless. As if on cue, the office door burst open. 6 men in tactical gear and Blackstone security badges poured in, weapons drawn. On the ground! Now! Sarah moved first, hands up, slowly dropping to her knees. The others followed her lead. Lena's face pressed against the floor that still smelled like spray paint, her heart racing. The Blackstone team leader stepped forward, older than the others, with the kind of calm authority that came from years of commanding people. Victor Moretti, you're wanted for questioning regarding the theft of proprietary Hale Industries documents. The rest of you are being detained as potential accomplices. This is illegal, Daniel said from his position on the floor. You're private security, not law enforcement. You have no authority to detain anyone. We're operating under contract with the FBI. That gives us exactly the authority we need." The team leader gestured, and two of his men hauled Victor to his feet, zip-tying his wrists. "The rest of you, stay down. Someone will be here shortly to process you." They took Victor first, dragging him out despite his attempts to resist. The remaining Blackstone operatives kept weapons trained on Lena, Marcus, Sarah, and Daniel, not speaking, just watching. Lena's mind raced. This was bad. This was the Hales using every connection they had to turn the system against them, and it was working. But then she heard it, voices in the hallway. Not Blackstone, something else. Official sounding, with the kind of authority that made the Blackstone team shift nervously. "FBI, drop your weapons." The Blackstone operatives looked at each other, confused. Their team leader spoke into his radio. "Base, we've got FBI here claiming jurisdiction. Confirm our authorization." A pause, then a woman's voice crackling through the radio. "Negative. You do not have FBI authorization. Repeat, you are not authorized to operate under federal jurisdiction. Stand down immediately." The team leader's face went from confident to panicked in seconds. "What? We were told—" "Someone lied to you," said a new voice, and a woman in an FBI windbreaker stepped into the office. She was in her 40s, black, with gray-streaked hair, and the expression of someone who'd seen every trick in the book and wasn't impressed. "Special Agent Monica Foster, you're all under arrest for impersonating federal officers." The Blackstone team tried to argue, but more FBI agents appeared, taking control of the situation with professional efficiency. Within minutes, the Blackstone operatives were the ones in restraints, being read their rights. Agent Foster helped Lena to her feet. "Ms. Cross, I presume?" "Yes." "How did you—" "Daniel Park contacted the Justice Department this afternoon, claiming someone was misusing FBI credentials. We looked into it, found some very interesting irregularities in how this investigation was being conducted." Foster's expression was grim. "The Hale family has been making calls to people they think owe them favors. Some of those people were stupid enough to actually follow through. Those people are now having very bad days." Victor was brought back in, his zip ties cut. "What about the files they stole?" "Being recovered as we speak. Your office break-in was carried out by individuals currently in custody. They're being very cooperative about who hired them." Foster pulled out a tablet, showing a photo of a man Lena didn't recognize. "This is James Corrigan, head of security for Hale Industries. He orchestrated the break-in, the fake FBI involvement, and about 6 other crimes I'm still cataloging. He's been arrested." "And Reginald Hale?" Victor asked. "We're building a case. It takes time to go after someone with his resources, but we're getting there." Foster looked at Lena. "Your interview last night helped. It gave us political cover to investigate without looking like we're going after a prominent family for no reason. The environmental dumping evidence this afternoon gave us something concrete to pursue. Keep doing what you're doing." It felt surreal. The FBI was actually helping them, not because the system was suddenly fair, but because they'd made enough noise that ignoring them became impossible. Foster and her team spent the next hour documenting the crime scene and taking statements. By the time they were finished, the sun was rising over the city, painting the office windows gold and orange. "You should all get somewhere safe," Foster said as they prepared to leave. "The Hales aren't going to stop just because we arrested a few of their operatives. If anything, they'll escalate." "We know," Sarah said. "We've been escalating right back." They made it back to Rita's truck without incident. Rita drove them to yet another location, a warehouse this time, converted into temporary living space. "One of my network's safe houses," she explained. "We've got 4 of them throughout the city. The Hales know about 2. The other 2 should keep you hidden for a while." Inside, Lena finally allowed herself to crash. The adrenaline that had been sustaining her evaporated, leaving her shaking and exhausted. Marcus wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and she realized she was freezing despite the warehouse's heating. "You're in shock," Marcus said quietly. "It's normal, just breathe." She tried. In, out, in, out. Slowly, the shaking subsided. Victor was on his phone, calling contacts, assessing damage, rebuilding networks. Sarah was setting up security again. Daniel was coordinating with prosecutors who were suddenly very interested in the Hale case now that the FBI was involved. And Lena sat wrapped in a blanket, trying to process that they'd just survived a kidnapping attempt by people pretending to be federal agents. That this was her life now. Rita appeared with coffee that tasted like it had been made in a basement during a war, which given the circumstances, wasn't far off. "How are you holding up?" Rita asked. "I don't know anymore. Every time I think things can't get worse, they do. Every time I think we're winning, the Hales find a new way to come at us." Lena sipped the terrible coffee because at least it was warm. "How did you do this for 20 years? One day at a time, one piece of evidence at a time. And I kept reminding myself that they couldn't win if I didn't quit." Rita sat down beside her. "That's the only real power you have against people like the Hales. They can take your money, your reputation, your safety. But they can't make you give up unless you decide to." "What if I want to give up?" "Then you give up. Walk away, disappear, start over somewhere they'll never find you. It's an option. Not a good one, but it exists." Lena thought about that, about running, changing her name, becoming someone else somewhere far from here, leaving Marcus to deal with the aftermath, letting the Hales win. "I can't," she said finally. "No," Rita agreed. "You can't, because you're not built that way. I saw it the second you walked into my operations center. You've got the look." "What look?" "The look of someone who'd rather die fighting than live on their knees. I've seen it in mirrors for 2 decades. Rita stood. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, we start coordinating with the others." "Others?" "The other 72 people the Hales destroyed. I've been reaching out since yesterday, telling them there's finally a real chance to be heard. 34 have already said yes. The rest are thinking about it. 34 people. All with stories like Lena's. All with evidence of what the Hales had done." "What if it's still not enough?" Lena asked. "Then we make it enough. We keep pushing until something breaks. Either them or us. And my money's on them, because they've never had to fight people who had nothing left to lose." Lena tried to sleep but couldn't. Her mind kept replaying the Blackstone team bursting into Victor's office, the feeling of being helpless on the floor, the knowledge that the Hales had corrupted even federal law enforcement. Around noon, Daniel announced he had news. Everyone gathered around his laptop where he'd pulled up what looked like legal filings. "The district attorney just announced a grand jury investigation into Hale Industries," Daniel said. "They're looking at everything. Environmental crimes, fraud, bribery, witness tampering. It's unprecedented." "How did that happen so fast?" Marcus asked. "Public pressure. The environmental dumping evidence went viral. The FBI's involvement legitimized the investigation, and now politicians are tripping over themselves to look tough on corporate crime." Daniel scrolled through the filing. "Grand jury is being convened next week. They'll hear testimony from affected communities, former employees, experts. It's real, and it's happening." Victor leaned over Daniel's shoulder. "Do they need Lena to testify?" "Eventually, yes. But they're starting with the financial crimes and environmental violations, saving the coercion and abuse charges for later in the investigation." "Why?" Lena asked. "Because those are he said, she said, unless we have corroboration. They want to establish the pattern of criminal behavior first, so when you testify about what Adrian and Reginald did to you, the jury's already primed to believe the Hales are capable of it." It made sense strategically. It also meant Lena's testimony would be the climax of the prosecution's case, the moment where corporate crimes became personal. No pressure. Sarah's phone buzzed. She read the message and smiled, which was unusual enough that everyone noticed. "What?" Lena asked. "Marshall and Locke just withdrew from representing the Hale family. They're citing ethical conflicts, but the real reason is probably that the Hales are about to be indicted, and no amount of crisis management can fix that." Sarah showed them the news alert. "The firm that was supposed to destroy your credibility just abandoned their client. That's a win." "Small victories," Rita said. "Take them where you can get them." Over the next week, those small victories started accumulating. 3 major news networks ran investigative pieces on the Hale family. The environmental advocacy groups Rita had connected with filed lawsuits in multiple states. Former Hale Industries employees started coming forward with stories of corruption and retaliation. And the grand jury investigation proceeded with methodical determination. Lena watched it unfold from various safe houses, moving every few days as Blackstone Security continued trying to locate them. Sarah's network of contacts kept them one step ahead, but it was exhausting. Lena felt like she'd been running for months, even though it had only been weeks since the wedding. Marcus kept her grounded. He'd taken a leave of absence from his TA position, telling his advisor he had a family emergency, which wasn't even a lie. "I've been going through Rita's blue pins," Marcus said one evening. "They were in a safe house that used to be a church, and Marcus had commandeered the former Sunday school room as a workspace. The people the Hales destroyed. I've been reaching out, seeing who's willing to testify before the grand jury. How many so far? 41 confirmed, another dozen still deciding. Marcus pulled up a spreadsheet. I've been organizing them by type of retaliation, wrongful termination, blacklisting, fabricated legal charges, threats against family members. The pattern is undeniable. The Hales' lawyers will argue each case is different. Individual disputes, not a pattern. That's why we need volume. One person saying the Hales destroyed them is a disgruntled employee. 40 people saying it is systematic abuse of power. Marcus looked at her. You're not alone in this anymore, Lena. You never were. You just didn't know the others existed. That night, Lena dreamed of standing in a courtroom surrounded by faces she didn't recognize. But when they spoke, she understood. These were the people the Hales had hurt. And they were all testifying together, their voices building into something too loud to ignore. She woke to Sarah shaking her shoulder. We've got a development. Adrian Hale just filed for bankruptcy. Lena sat up, disoriented. What? How is that possible? His family's worth hundreds of millions. Was worth hundreds of millions. The Hale Industries stock has dropped 70% since the investigation started. Banks are calling in loans, investors are fleeing. Adrian's personal assets were apparently leveraged against the company's success, and now it's all collapsing. Sarah showed her the news article. He's claiming he's a victim of a smear campaign and asking the court to discharge his debts. That's not how bankruptcy works, Daniel said, appearing with more terrible coffee. You can't discharge debts incurred through fraud, and we've got evidence his whole lifestyle was funded through his family's criminal enterprises. This is a Hail Mary to protect assets before criminal charges hit. Will it work? Not even a little, but it shows they're desperate. People who are winning don't declare bankruptcy. Victor had been quiet for days, working on something he wouldn't discuss. Now he closed his laptop and addressed the group. I've been coordinating with the former Meridian Pharmaceuticals employees Marcus found. 17 of them are willing to testify about the drug safety fraud. Combined with the files we recovered from the break-in, we have enough to prove the Hales knowingly approved dangerous drugs. That's murder, Marcus said quietly. At minimum, it's negligent homicide, 16 deaths linked to those drugs. Probably more if we dig deeper. Victor's expression was carved from stone. Catherine died because she tried to stop this. The least I can do is make sure her death mattered. It already mattered, Lena said. It brought you into this fight. It made you look deeper. Without Catherine, you wouldn't have been there to stop my wedding. Victor's eyes were bright with something that might have been grief or gratitude or both. Thank you for saying that. The grand jury hearings began the following Monday. Lena watched the news coverage from another safe house, this one an apartment above a laundromat that smelled perpetually of detergent and dryer sheets. The prosecution called witness after witness, environmental scientists testifying about contaminated groundwater, community members describing health problems, former employees explaining how they'd been punished for raising concerns. On day 3, Rita herself testified. Lena watched the 70-year-old woman sit in front of the grand jury and calmly explain how Hale Industries had destroyed her life when she'd tried to hold them accountable for her daughter's death. Did you ever receive compensation for your daughter's death? The prosecutor asked. No. The Hales' lawyers buried my case in procedural motions until I ran out of money to fight. Then they offered me $20,000 to go away. I refused. Why? Because my daughter was worth more than $20,000. Because they needed to be held accountable. Because someone had to say no. The camera showed Reginald Hale in the gallery, his face expressionless. But Lena could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched when Rita spoke. He knew he was losing. On day 7, the grand jury handed down indictments. 15 counts against Reginald Hale personally, 23 counts against Hale Industries as a corporation, 8 counts against Adrian, additional charges against various executives and mid-level managers who'd participated in the crimes. The news called it the biggest corporate corruption case in a decade. Lena called it justice, but incomplete, because her testimony, the coercion, the threats, the abuse, hadn't been part of the grand jury proceedings yet. That would come later, in a separate proceeding focusing specifically on what the Hales had done to her and Marcus. Are you ready? Daniel asked when he gave her the news. They want you to testify next month. Full deposition, under oath, everything documented. I'm ready, Lena said, and surprised herself by meaning it. The month between the indictments and her deposition felt both infinite and instantaneous. The Hales tried everything to stop the prosecution, filing motions to dismiss, claiming the evidence was obtained illegally, arguing that corporate documents were protected by attorney-client privilege. Every motion was denied. Their media strategy collapsed when 3 major newspapers ran coordinated exposés documenting decades of Hale family crimes. Public opinion had shifted from skeptical to outraged. And slowly, inevitably, the empire Reginald Hale had spent his life building began to crumble. Hale Industries stock became worthless. Subsidiaries filed for bankruptcy. Criminal trials were scheduled. Civil lawsuits piled up from victims demanding compensation. Catherine Hale, Adrian's mother, filed for divorce, claiming she'd been unaware of her husband's and son's activities. Nobody believed her, but the filing itself was significant. Even the family was fracturing. Adrian himself disappeared for a week, triggering speculation that he'd fled the country. But he surfaced at a press conference looking haggard and defeated. I made terrible mistakes, he read from a prepared statement, his voice hollow. I hurt people I cared about. I let my family's expectations override my own moral compass. I'm profoundly sorry, and I'm cooperating fully with investigators. Lena watched the press conference with mixed feelings. Part of her wanted to feel vindicated, but mostly she just felt tired. Adrian looked like someone who'd woken up from a dream and discovered it had been a nightmare. He's trying to cut a deal, Daniel explained. Testify against his father in exchange for reduced charges. The prosecutors are considering it. Will they take it? Probably. Adrian's testimony could put Reginald away for life. That's worth more than punishing Adrian to the fullest extent. It should have bothered Lena more. The idea that Adrian might get a reduced sentence after everything he'd done. But she found she didn't care as much as she thought she would. He'd lost everything that mattered to him. His family's approval, his social standing, his future. Prison time would just be the formal acknowledgement of a destruction that had already occurred. The day of her deposition arrived. Lena wore clothes Rita had helped her pick out. Professional, but not expensive. The kind of outfit that said, credible witness without screaming, victim. The deposition was in a conference room in the prosecutor's office. Present were 2 assistant district attorneys, a court reporter, Daniel as her lawyer, and via video link, Adrian's defense attorney, who had the right to ask questions. They started with background, Lena's childhood, her education, how she'd met Adrian. The prosecutors were gentle, building a timeline that established her as a real person with a real life before the Hales had entered it. Then they got to the relationship itself. Lena walked them through it, the charming early dates, the gradual introduction to his family, the moment she'd realized something was wrong. When did Adrian first threaten you? The lead prosecutor asked. When I tried to break up with him. He showed me a folder on my brother. Evidence of fraud charges that looked real but weren't. He said the charges would disappear if I married him, and if I refused, Marcus would go to prison. How did that make you feel? Terrified, trapped, like my life wasn't mine anymore. They went through every incident, every threat, every moment of control, every time Adrian had made it clear she didn't have a choice. Lena's voice remained steady, clinical, like she was describing things that had happened to someone else. Adrian's lawyer asked questions designed to undermine her credibility. Had she ever told Adrian she loved him? Yes. Had she accepted expensive gifts? Yes. Had she seemed happy in photos from that time? I was performing, Lena said. That's what you do when someone has power over you. You become whatever they need you to be because the alternative is worse. But you could have gone to the police at any time. Could I? With what evidence? Adrian was careful. The threats were always private. The fabricated charges against my brother looked legitimate. If I'd gone to the police, who would they have believed? A powerful family with connections throughout the legal system, or a secretary making wild accusations? The lawyer didn't have a good answer for that. The deposition lasted 6 hours. By the end, Lena felt wrung out, exhausted, but also strangely lighter. She'd told her truth under oath. It was documented now, part of the official record. Whatever happened next, her story would exist. Outside the prosecutor's office, Daniel hugged her. You did great, really great. That testimony is going to be the centerpiece of the case against Adrian and Reginald. When's the trial? 6 months, maybe. They're still building the case, coordinating with federal prosecutors, organizing the evidence. Daniel paused. Are you going to be okay testifying in open court when the time comes? Lena thought about that. About standing in front of a jury, facing Adrian and Reginald, telling her story while cameras broadcast it to the world. I don't know, she admitted, but I'll do it anyway. That night, back at the safe house, Victor shared news that made Lena's exhaustion evaporate. The Hale family just offered a settlement, he said. Full restitution to all documented victims, establishment of a compensation fund, dissolution of Hale Industries with assets going to affected communities. In exchange, they want immunity from criminal prosecution. Absolutely not, Lena said immediately. That's what I told the prosecutors. But they wanted me to ask you anyway. It's your case, your decision whether to accept. Lena looked around the safe house. At Marcus, who'd sacrificed his academic career to support her. At Sarah, who'd put herself in danger repeatedly. At Daniel, who'd worked hundreds of unpaid hours. At Rita, who'd spent 20 years documenting crimes nobody wanted to prosecute. At Victor, who'd lost his sister and turned that grief into purpose. We didn't come this far to let them buy their way out, Lena said. We hold them accountable, fully, whatever it takes. Victor smiled. That's what I thought you'd say. I'll tell the prosecutors. The settlement offer was rejected. The trial date was set. And Lena Cross prepared to face the family that had tried to own her. The trial began on a Tuesday in October, 6 months after Lena had walked away from that altar. The courthouse looked the same as it had during the restraining order hearing, but everything else had changed. The crowd outside had tripled in size, protesters, supporters, media from outlets Lena had never heard of, all of them wanting a piece of the story. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Lena sat in the front row behind the prosecution's table, flanked by Marcus on one side and Victor on the other. Sarah was somewhere in the back, eyes constantly scanning for threats that probably wouldn't come, but might. Daniel sat at the prosecution table itself, brought on as a special consultant because he knew the case better than anyone. Across the aisle, Reginald Hale sat with his legal team. 4 lawyers in suits that probably cost more than Lena's entire year of salary at her old job. Reginald himself looked older than she remembered, thinner, grayer, but still carrying that air of absolute certainty that the world would bend to his will because it always had. Adrian sat 3 rows behind his father, separated deliberately. He'd taken the deal, agreed to testify against Reginald in exchange for reduced charges. He looked hollow, like someone had scooped out everything that made him recognizably human and left just the shell. When his eyes met Lena's, he looked away first. Small victory, she thought. She'd take it. Judge Kim presided again, which felt like a gift. She'd seen enough of the Hales' tactics during the restraining order hearing to not be impressed by their money or their name. The People versus Reginald James Hale, the clerk announced. Case number 2024-CR-08847. Charges include conspiracy to commit fraud, witness tampering, bribery of public officials, environmental crimes, and coercion. The prosecution's opening statement was delivered by a woman named Sandra Reeves, a prosecutor in her 50s who'd built a reputation destroying white-collar criminals. She spoke without notes, walking the jury through the case with the confidence of someone who'd memorized every piece of evidence. This case is about power, Sandra said. Specifically, about what happens when someone has enough power that they believe rules don't apply to them. Reginald Hale spent 40 years building an empire on the backs of people he hurt, workers who got sick from illegal chemical exposure, communities whose water was poisoned, employees who were destroyed for telling the truth. And when one woman, Lena Cross, refused to become another victim, the Hale family used every resource they had to force her into compliance. She gestured to Lena. The jury's eyes followed. You'll hear from Miss Cross about what the Hales did to her, but you'll also hear from dozens of other victims. People whose lives were destroyed because they stood in the way of Hale Industries' profits. People who were silenced, threatened, ruined. This isn't about one crime. It's about a pattern of behavior spanning decades. And we're going to prove every single bit of it. The defense's opening was delivered by Marcus Wellington, the same lawyer who'd failed to get Lena's restraining order approved. He was smoother now, more prepared, but Lena could see the concern in his eyes. He knew what evidence the prosecution had. My client is a businessman, Wellington said, a man who built an empire through hard work and smart decisions. Did some employees at his companies make mistakes? Yes. Did some facilities fail to meet every regulatory standard? Unfortunately, yes. But painting Reginald Hale as some kind of criminal mastermind is a fantasy. He's a 72-year-old man who trusted the wrong people to run his businesses ethically. He's not responsible for every decision made by every manager in a company that employs thousands. It was a decent argument if you ignored all the evidence proving Reginald personally approved illegal activities, which the jury wouldn't, because Sandra was about to bury them in documentation. The first week of trial was dedicated to the corporate crimes. Environmental scientists testified about contaminated sites. Accountants explained shell corporations designed to hide illegal payments. Former employees described being ordered to falsify safety reports. Rita Walsh took the stand on day 4. She walked the jury through her daughter's death, the lawsuit she'd filed, how the Hales had destroyed her financially and socially for daring to seek justice. "Did you ever consider giving up?" Sandra asked. "Every day," Rita said honestly. "But then I'd think about my daughter and all the other daughters who'd suffer if nobody held them accountable. So I kept going." Wellington tried to undermine her on cross-examination, suggesting she was bitter and vengeful, that her 20 years of documentation proved obsession rather than legitimate concern. "Ms. Walsh, isn't it true you've devoted your entire life to attacking the Hale family?" "No," Rita said calmly. "I've devoted my life to documenting their crimes. There's a difference. If they'd stopped committing crimes, I wouldn't have had anything to document." A few jurors smiled. Wellington moved on. The second week brought the former Meridian Pharmaceuticals employees, 17 people who'd worked for the subsidiary that had approved dangerous drugs. One by one, they testified about pressure from corporate to push products through testing, about safety concerns being ignored, about being fired or blacklisted when they pushed back. The most devastating testimony came from a woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, a researcher who'd flagged cardiac problems during drug trials. "I reported my findings to my supervisor," Dr. Kim testified. "He told me to run the tests again. I did. The results were the same. The drug caused heart arrhythmias in 30% of test subjects. I reported it again. This time I was called to a meeting with Reginald Hale personally." "What happened at that meeting?" Sandra asked. "He told me the company had invested $80 million developing this drug, that pulling it now would cost jobs, hurt investors, damage the company's reputation. He asked if I was sure about my findings." "What did you say?" "I said I was certain. The drug was dangerous and shouldn't be approved." Dr. Kim's voice wavered. "He thanked me for my dedication to scientific integrity. Then he had security escort me out of the building. I was fired that afternoon." "And the drug?" "It was approved 6 months later. Over the next 2 years, it was linked to 16 deaths and 47 serious cardiac events before the FDA forced a recall." The courtroom was silent. Even Wellington didn't look like he wanted to cross-examine that testimony, but he had to try. "Dr. Kim, is it possible your test results were flawed? That the cardiac events were coincidental?" "No. The correlation was clear and statistically significant. Any competent researcher would have reached the same conclusion. But you were the only one who raised concerns, because everyone else who raised concerns had already been fired." Wellington sat down. Victor testified on day 9. He walked the jury through his sister Catherine's story, how she'd found evidence of the pharmaceutical fraud, how she'd tried to report it, how the Hales had destroyed her career and reputation until she couldn't see a way forward anymore. "My sister was brilliant," Victor said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "She believed in doing the right thing even when it was hard. The Hales taught her that doing the right thing gets you destroyed. That lesson killed her as surely as if they'd pulled the trigger themselves." Wellington objected, calling it speculation. Judge Kim sustained it. But the jury had heard it, and you couldn't unhear something like that. The third week was Lena's. She took the stand on Monday morning, wearing a simple blue dress that Sarah had deemed trustworthy, but not trying too hard. Her hands shook as she was sworn in, and she gripped the witness box to steady herself. Sandra started gently. "Ms. Cross, can you tell the jury how you met Adrian Hale?" Lena walked them through it. The elevator, the first date, how charming he'd seemed. She didn't sugarcoat it or pretend she'd known from the beginning that something was wrong. She'd been genuinely interested in him at first. That made what came after worse, not better. "When did you first meet the defendant, Reginald Hale?" "About 6 weeks into dating Adrian. He invited me to a family dinner. Reginald spent most of the evening asking me questions about my background, my family, my prospects. It felt less like getting to know me and more like an evaluation. What kind of questions? He asked about my father leaving when I was young, about my mother working multiple jobs, about my community college degree, and why I hadn't gone to a 4-year university. Every question was designed to highlight that I came from nothing. How did that make you feel? Small, inadequate, like I was being measured against some standard I could never meet and found lacking. Did Adrian defend you? No. He sat there quietly while his father dissected my entire life. Afterward, when I asked why he hadn't said anything, he told me I needed to develop thicker skin if I wanted to be part of his world. Sandra took her through the relationship's progression, the gradual isolation, the controlling behavior disguised as concern. The moment Lena had tried to break up with Adrian, and he'd shown her the fabricated evidence against Marcus. "What did you do when you saw that evidence?" Sandra asked. "I agreed to marry him. Because what else could I do? Let my brother go to prison for crimes he didn't commit? Watch his entire future get destroyed because I dated the wrong person?" Lena's voice cracked. "I chose my brother's freedom over my own. I thought that was the only choice I had." "When did you realize there might be another option?" "When Victor Moretti walked into that cathedral and told me I had a choice, a real one. That's when I understood I could say no." Sandra showed her photos, the bruises on her wrist, the documentation from her journal, text messages from Adrian that seemed caring on the surface but were subtly controlling underneath. "Can you read this text from Adrian, dated 3 days before the wedding?" Lena looked at the message displayed on the courtroom screen. It says, "Looking forward to our life together. My family has such plans for us. I know you'll make me proud." What did that message mean to you? That I was expected to perform, to be what his family needed. The words sound sweet, but the subtext was clear. I'd better not embarrass them. Wellington's cross-examination was aggressive but careful. He couldn't attack Lena too hard without looking like he was victimizing her all over again, but he tried to plant doubt. "Miss Cross, you accepted expensive gifts from Adrian, didn't you?" "Yes." "You attended events at his family's estate?" "Yes." "You wore designer clothes, ate at expensive restaurants, enjoyed the lifestyle his money provided?" "I did those things because Adrian wanted me to, because refusing would have been seen as ungrateful or difficult, or because you enjoyed them." "I enjoyed not being threatened. I enjoyed moments when Adrian seemed like the person I thought he was at the beginning. But enjoyment under duress isn't consent, Mr. Wellington. It's survival." Wellington tried several more angles, suggesting she'd pursued Adrian for his money, that she'd invented the coercion story when the relationship didn't work out, that her journal was written after the fact to support false allegations. Lena stayed calm through all of it. She'd practiced this with Daniel, knew how to answer without getting defensive or emotional in ways the jury might interpret as instability. "Isn't it true you could have walked away at any time?" "Could I?" "With fabricated criminal charges hanging over my brother's head. With Adrian's family controlling judges and prosecutors? With no resources to fight them?" Lena met Wellington's eyes. Walking away wasn't an option. That's what coercion means. Making someone believe they don't have a choice, even though legally they do. But you did walk away, eventually. Because Victor gave me evidence that changed the equation, that let me see the threats were based on lies. But without that evidence, I'd have married Adrian to protect my brother, and I'd have spent the rest of my life trapped. Wellington sat down, looking less satisfied than he'd probably hoped. Adrian testified next, called by the prosecution as part of his plea agreement. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 6 months. The confident heir who'd stood at that altar had been replaced by someone who flinched when Judge Kim spoke sharply. "Mr. Hale, did you threaten Lena Cross?" Sandra asked. "Yes." His voice was barely audible. "Can you speak up for the jury?" "Yes. I threatened her. I showed her fabricated evidence against her brother and told her the only way to make it go away was to marry me." "Why?" Adrian was silent for a long moment. "Because my father told me to find a suitable wife, someone who fit the family image. I'd been dating Lena for a few months, and she was perfect, smart, attractive, from a background that made her controllable. When I suggested marriage and she hesitated, my father said we couldn't afford to let her refuse, that it would make the family look weak. So you fabricated criminal charges against her brother? My father did. I just delivered them. Adrian looked at Lena for the first time. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm genuinely sorry for what I did to you. Lena said nothing. His apology meant less than nothing at this point. Sandra walked Adrian through his father's involvement in every aspect of the coercion. How Reginald had personally contacted judges to ensure the fake charges against Marcus looked legitimate. How he'd hired investigators to dig up dirt on Lena that could be used if threats didn't work. How he'd orchestrated the entire campaign with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to business. Your father saw Lena Cross as what exactly? Sandra asked. As a problem to solve, as someone who needed to be brought into compliance with the family's plans. Adrian's voice was hollow. He doesn't see people as people. He sees them as assets or obstacles. Lena was supposed to be an asset. When she tried to be anything else, he made her an example. Wellington didn't even cross-examine. What could he ask that wouldn't make things worse? The prosecution rested on Thursday afternoon. They'd called 43 witnesses, introduced hundreds of documents, and built a case that felt overwhelming in its completeness. The defense called character witnesses, business associates who praised Reginald's philanthropy, friends who described him as generous and kind, employees who said he was demanding but fair. It was all surface-level stuff that couldn't compete with the mountain of evidence showing what he did when people weren't watching. Reginald himself didn't testify. Wellington probably advised against it. Too many questions he couldn't answer without either lying or incriminating himself further. Closing arguments happened on Friday. Wellington did his best. He argued that Reginald was a businessman, not a criminal. That mistakes had been made by subordinates, not by him personally. That Lena's testimony was unverified, that Adrian's was coerced by his plea agreement, that the corporate crimes were blown out of proportion by activists with an agenda. It sounded desperate because it was. Sandra's closing was devastating. She walked the jury through the evidence methodically, connecting Reginald personally to each crime. His signature on documents, his emails approving illegal activities, his direct orders to destroy people who threatened his empire. Reginald Hale wants you to believe he's a victim, Sandra said, a successful man being torn down by people who resent his achievements. But this case isn't about success or wealth. It's about what he did to maintain that wealth. The people he hurt, the lives he destroyed, the laws he broke because he believed power meant immunity. She turned to face the jury directly. You have the power to prove him wrong, to show that in this country, nobody is too wealthy or too connected to face consequences for their crimes. Lena Cross had the courage to say no when it would have been easier to submit. Now you have the opportunity to say no on behalf of every victim who couldn't. Use it. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Lena spent that time in a hotel room Victor had rented, watching mindless TV and trying not to think about what would happen if they lost. If after everything, Reginald walked away free. Marcus brought her food she didn't eat. Sarah checked in hourly. Victor worked quietly in the corner, already planning next steps whether they won or lost. On Tuesday afternoon, Daniel called. Verdict's in. We need to get to the courthouse now. The drive felt infinite. Lena's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Marcus held one, grounding her. Whatever happens, he said quietly, you already won. You stood up to them. You told the truth. That matters more than any verdict. It won't feel like it matters if they let him walk. No, but it'll still be true. The courtroom was packed again. Lena took her seat, feeling every eye on her. Across the aisle, Reginald sat with perfect posture, his face unreadable. Judge Kim entered. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. The forewoman stood, a middle-aged black woman who'd been an engineer before retiring. She held the verdict form steady. In the matter of the People versus Reginald James Hale, on the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, how do you find? Guilty. Lena's breath caught. On the count of witness tampering? Guilty. On the count of bribery of public officials? Guilty. The forewoman kept reading. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 15 counts, 15 guilty verdicts. Reginald's face didn't change, but his hands, folded on the table in front of him, went white-knuckled. Judge Kim polled the jury individually, standard procedure in high-profile cases. Each juror confirmed their verdict. There was no ambiguity, no dissent. Mr. Hale, Judge Kim said when the polling was complete, You've been found guilty on all counts. Sentencing will be scheduled for 6 weeks from today. Until then, I'm remanding you to custody. Bailiff. Two bailiffs moved forward. Reginald stood with dignity, allowing himself to be handcuffed without protest. As they led him past Lena's row, he looked at her. Not with hatred or regret, just acknowledgement. A man who'd spent his life controlling people, recognizing the one who'd finally refused to be controlled. Then he was gone. The courtroom erupted, media scrambling for the exits to file stories, supporters crying and hugging, the prosecution team shaking hands and smiling with the tired relief of people who'd just won a war. Lena sat still, trying to process what had just happened. "We won," Marcus said, like he couldn't quite believe it either. "We won," Lena repeated. The words felt foreign. Outside the courthouse, Sandra held a press conference. Lena stood beside her along with Rita, Victor, and several other victims who'd testified. "Today's verdict sends a clear message," Sandra said. "No amount of wealth or power puts you above the law." The jury heard the evidence and rendered justice. For Lena Cross, for the communities poisoned by Hale Industries, for every employee who was destroyed for telling the truth, justice was served. Reporters shouted questions. Lena answered a few. Yes, she was relieved. Yes, she hoped this would encourage other victims to come forward. No, she didn't feel vindicated so much as exhausted. But when someone asked what she planned to do next, Lena paused. "I'm going to live my life," she said. "On my terms. That's all I ever wanted." The sentencing hearing 6 weeks later was anticlimactic compared to the trial. Judge Kim sentenced Reginald to 22 years in federal prison. At 72, it was effectively a life sentence. Adrian received 5 years for his role in the coercion, with credit for cooperation. He'd probably serve 3. Hale Industries was dissolved entirely, assets liquidated to pay restitution to victims and affected communities. The family's name, once synonymous with power and success, became a cautionary tale about unchecked corruption. Catherine Hale, Adrian's mother, moved to France and gave an interview claiming she'd been as much a victim as anyone. Nobody bought it, but she was never charged with crimes, mostly because she'd never actually done anything except enable her husband and son through silence. Lena testified at several civil trials as victims sought compensation. Each time got a little easier. The story became less painful to tell, more like something that had happened to someone else. The financial settlement from the Hale estate came through 8 months after the verdict. Lena's share was more money than she'd ever imagined having. She used part of it to pay off Marcus's student loans and set up a fund for his doctorate. The rest she put into starting a nonprofit. The organization was Rita's idea, really. All these people who got crushed fighting corporate crimes, they need support. Legal help, financial assistance, emotional counseling, someone to make sure they're not fighting alone. They called it the Catherine Moretti Foundation, named after Victor's sister. Victor funded the first 2 years of operations. Lena ran it with Rita as her co-director. They hired lawyers, investigators, therapists, created a network where people could connect, share resources, find solidarity in the aftermath of corporate retaliation. Within a year, they were helping 50 families. Within 2 years, twice that. Lena still had nightmares sometimes. Still flinched when she saw men in expensive suits who moved with too much confidence. Still caught herself scanning rooms for exits, planning escape routes, thinking like someone who might need to run. Sarah said that was normal. Trauma doesn't disappear just because justice was served. You just learn to carry it differently. Marcus went back to graduate school, finished his doctorate, got a teaching position at a university 2 hours away. He called Lena every Sunday, without fail. They'd talk about nothing, his students, her foundation, their mother who'd passed away peacefully in her sleep the year after the trial, never knowing how close she'd come to losing both her children to the Hale's machinations. Victor became something like family, not romantically. Lena had no interest in dating anyone, maybe ever, but in the way that people who survive wars together become bonded. He served on the foundation's board, showed up for every major event, sent flowers on the anniversary of Catherine's death. "I'm not good at expressing this," Victor said once, about a year after the trial. "But what you did, standing up to them, refusing to back down, it gave Catherine's death meaning. She tried to stop them, and it broke her. You tried, and it broke them instead. That matters to me more than I can say." Lena didn't know how to respond to that, so she just hugged him, and they stood there in the foundation's office holding on to each other like survivors of the same shipwreck. 2 years after the trial, Lena gave a TEDx talk. She almost refused. Public speaking still made her anxious, and talking about her experience felt like performing trauma for entertainment. But the organizers convinced her that her story could help people understand coercive control, could encourage victims to recognize they weren't alone. She spoke for 18 minutes about what it felt like to be trapped, about the difference between legal freedom and actual freedom, about how saying no to power was the hardest and most important thing she'd ever done. "I'm not a hero," Lena said at the end of the talk. "I'm just someone who got scared enough and angry enough to finally choose myself over what powerful people wanted from me. If my story helps even one person recognize that they have that choice too, then maybe everything I went through meant something." The talk went viral, millions of views, interview requests from major networks, offers to write a book, develop a movie, license her story. Lena turned most of it down. This wasn't a story that needed to be commodified. It was her life, and she'd reclaimed it. That was enough. But she did agree to one profile in a major magazine, because the journalist promised to focus on the Foundation's work rather than the sensational details of the trial. The interview happened in the Foundation's office, surrounded by case files from people they were helping. The journalist asked good questions: how Lena had healed, what she'd learned, whether she had regrets. "I regret ever meeting Adrian Hale," Lena said. "I regret the time I lost, the fear I experienced, the damage that can't be undone. But I don't regret fighting back. I don't regret trusting the people who helped me. And I don't regret every moment that taught me exactly how strong I could be when I had no other choice." What would you say to your younger self, the woman standing at that altar? Lena thought about it. "I'd say what's about to happen is terrifying, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. But you're tougher than you know, and you're not going to face this alone." The article ran with a photo of Lena in the Foundation's office, surrounded by the team she'd built. She looked older than she had at the trial. Tired, but real in a way she'd never looked in photos from her time with Adrian, when she'd been performing happiness instead of living it. 3 years after this trial, on an ordinary Tuesday, Lena realized she'd gone an entire day without thinking about the Hales. An entire day where her life had just been her life. Work she cared about, people she trusted, problems that were normal instead of existential. It felt strange, like discovering a weight she'd been carrying had disappeared without her noticing. "Is this what normal feels like?" she asked Sarah over coffee. They still met monthly, ostensibly for security consultations, but really just to talk. "I don't know if you'll ever have normal," Sarah said honestly. "What happened to you changes you permanently, but you can have good. You can have meaningful. You can have yours. That's enough? It's everything." Marcus got married 4 years after the trial. His wife was a marine biologist he'd met at a conference, funny and smart, and completely unimpressed by his connection to the famous Hale case. She knew the story, obviously. Everyone did. But she loved Marcus for who he was now, not for what he'd survived. At the wedding, Lena gave a toast. "My brother has always been the best person I know, kind when the world rewards cruelty. Honest when lying would be easier. Strong in ways that don't require anyone else to be weak." She raised her glass. "Marcus, you deserved happiness all along. I'm just glad you finally found someone who sees it as clearly as I do." After the toast, Marcus hugged her. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't protected me, if you hadn't been willing to sacrifice everything to keep me safe." "I'd do it again," Lena said, "but I'd do it differently. I'd tell you what was happening instead of trying to handle it alone. I'd trust you to be strong enough to face it with me." "Deal. No more protecting each other by keeping secrets." "Deal." 5 years after the trial, Lena got a letter from Adrian. It was forwarded through multiple channels: the Foundation's office, Daniel's law firm, finally to Lena herself. She almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity won. The letter was surprisingly short. No justifications, no excuses, just 3 paragraphs acknowledging what he'd done and expressing regret without asking for forgiveness. He was getting out of prison in 2 months, moving to another state, planning to live quietly under a different name. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he wrote. "I'm not asking for it. I just wanted you to know that the person who hurt you doesn't exist anymore." Prison, therapy, and 5 years of thinking about who I was. It broke me down and forced me to rebuild into someone different. Someone who understands that love without respect is possession, and possession isn't love at all. The letter ended with, "I hope you're happy, really happy, in ways I never allowed you to be." You deserve that all along. Lena read it twice, then filed it away in a drawer she never opened. Maybe someday she'd feel something about it, forgiveness or closure, or even just indifference. For now, it was just words from someone who'd hurt her, and words didn't change the past. But they could acknowledge it. That was something. 6 years after the trial, the foundation had helped 300 families. They'd won landmark legal victories that made it easier to hold corporations accountable. They'd trained lawyers and investigators in recognizing coercive control. They'd built something that would outlast Lena's personal story. Rita passed away that year, peacefully in her sleep at 78. Her funeral was attended by over 200 people, victims she'd helped, journalists she'd guided, activists she'd inspired. Lena gave the eulogy. Rita taught me that surviving isn't enough, Lena said. You have to turn survival into purpose, pain into action, anger into something constructive. She spent 20 years documenting crimes nobody wanted to see, and in the end, those documents brought down an empire. That's legacy. That's what it means to refuse to be silenced. The foundation was renamed in Rita's honor, the Rita Walsh Center for Corporate Accountability. Rita would have hated the attention, but she'd have loved the work continuing. 7 years after the trial, on what would have been the anniversary of that failed wedding, Lena stood in front of the mirror in her apartment. The apartment was hers, bought with settlement money but chosen entirely by her. The clothes she wore were hers. The schedule she kept was hers. The life she lived was completely, entirely hers. She looked different than she had at that altar. Older, obviously, but also more solid, somehow. Like she'd been sketched in pencil before, and someone had finally traced her in ink. There were still scars, moments when a certain tone of voice made her flinch, nightmares that woke her in cold sweats, an instinctive distrust of powerful men who spoke too smoothly. But those were just marks from a battle she'd won. They didn't define her. What defined her was what came after, the foundation she'd built, the people she'd helped, the life she'd reclaimed and reshaped into something worth living. Marcus called that evening. You doing okay? I know today's kind of an anniversary. I'm good, actually. Great, even. And she meant it. I was thinking about how different my life is now compared to where it would be if I'd said yes at that altar. Where would you be? Trapped. Performing. Slowly disappearing into whatever the Hales needed me to be. Lena looked around her apartment, the art she'd chosen, the books she loved, the life that was unmistakably hers. Instead, I'm here. Free. That's everything. You earned it. We earned it. You, me, Victor, Sarah, Daniel, Rita, everyone who refused to let them win. Lena smiled. I'm going to have dinner with Victor tonight. Want to join via video call? He's making that terrible pasta he thinks is good. Marcus laughed. Absolutely. I'll bring the wine. They talked for another hour, easy and comfortable, about nothing important and everything that mattered. That night, sitting around Victor's table with Marcus on video and Sarah dropping by with dessert, Lena felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever. Joy. Simple, uncomplicated joy. Not the performed happiness she'd faked during her time with Adrian, not the grim satisfaction of winning a trial, just the quiet contentment of being surrounded by people who valued her for exactly who she was. What are you smiling about? Victor asked. Nothing. Everything. I'm just happy. Good. You've earned it about 1,000 times over. Later, after everyone had left and Lena was cleaning up the kitchen, she found herself thinking about the woman she'd been 7 years ago, the one who'd stood at that altar trembling, believing she had no choice but to submit. If that woman could see her now, what would she think? She'd be proud, Lena decided. Proud that she'd found the courage to say no. Proud that she'd survived the aftermath. Proud that she'd turned that survival into something meaningful. You did good, Lena whispered to her past self. You scared, and you did it anyway. That's the only kind of brave that matters. 8 years after the trial, Lena was invited to speak at a survivors' conference. She almost said no. She'd been doing less public speaking, focusing more on the foundation's work, but the organizer was persuasive. These people need to hear from someone who fought a powerful institution and won, the organizer said. They need to know it's possible. So Lena went. The conference was in a hotel ballroom filled with 200 people who'd survived various forms of institutional abuse, corporate retaliation, religious manipulation, political persecution, domestic violence enabled by systems that protected abusers. Lena spoke for 30 minutes, not about the trial or the Hales specifically, but about what comes after. The rebuilding. The work of reclaiming yourself when powerful forces have spent years trying to erase you. Survival isn't the end of the story, Lena said. It's the beginning. Because once you survive, you have to figure out what to do with the life you saved. You have to decide who you're going to be now that you're free to choose. During the Q&A, a young woman raised her hand. She couldn't have been more than 25, and she looked exhausted in the way that came from fighting battles that should never have been hers to fight. "How do you stop being angry?" the woman asked. "I won my case, my abuser's in prison. I should feel vindicated. But I'm just angry all the time, at him, at the system that protected him, at myself for not seeing it sooner. How do you let that go?" Lena thought carefully before answering. "I don't know if you ever completely let it go. I'm still angry sometimes. Angry at the Hales for what they did. Angry at everyone who looked away while it was happening. Angry at a system that makes justice so hard to access." She paused. "But I learned to channel that anger into something constructive. The foundation, advocacy work, helping other people fight their battles. The anger doesn't disappear, but it becomes fuel instead of poison. What if I don't want to turn my trauma into a career? What if I just want to be normal? Then be normal. You don't owe anyone your story or your pain or your continued activism. The fact that you survived is enough. What you do with that survival is entirely your choice." Lena smiled. "That's the point of freedom. You get to choose what matters to you now, not what other people think you should do with your second chance." The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." After the conference, several attendees approached Lena. They wanted to share their stories, to connect, to know they weren't alone in the complicated aftermath of survival. Lena listened to each one, offered contact information for the foundation, provided resources and encouragement, and the simple acknowledgement that what they'd survived was real and terrible and not their fault. It was exhausting. But it was also why she did this work. Because 7 years ago, she'd been the one needing to know she wasn't alone. And people like Victor and Rita and Sarah had shown up to make sure she wasn't. Now it was her turn to show up for others. 9 years after the trial, on an ordinary spring morning, Lena woke up and realized she'd stopped counting. Stopped marking time by distance from that altar, that cathedral, that moment when her life had almost been permanently derailed. The Hales were just something that had happened, a chapter in her story, but not the whole book. She got up, made coffee, and went to the foundation's office. They were working on a case involving a whistleblower who'd exposed fraud at a defense contractor and was now being buried in legal retaliation. It was complicated and frustrating and exactly the kind of work that mattered. Marcus called at lunch. "I'm going to be a dad. We just found out," Lena screamed, actually screamed with joy, making everyone in the office look at her in alarm. "When? How far along? Is everyone healthy? Have you told anyone else?" Marcus laughed at her barrage of questions. 4 months. Everyone's healthy. You're the first call after our parents. I'm going to be an aunt. I'm going to be the best aunt. I know you are. This kid's going to be surrounded by people who fought for the right to exist freely. That's a pretty good start." After they hung up, Lena sat at her desk crying happy tears. 10 years ago, she'd been prepared to destroy her life to protect Marcus. Now she got to celebrate his expanding family. The contrast wasn't lost on her. That evening, she met Victor for their standing monthly dinner. He'd aged well, some gray at the temples, lines around his eyes that came from smiling more than he used to. "Marcus is having a baby," Lena announced before they'd even ordered. "I know. He called me too. I'm going to be Uncle Victor." He smiled. "We're building a family, you know, not through blood or marriage, but through choice. Through showing up for each other. Is that enough?" "It's more than enough. It's everything." They ordered too much food and talked about everything and nothing. Victor's latest investigation into pharmaceutical pricing. Lena's plans to expand the foundation's services. Whether Marcus's baby would inherit his academic brilliance or his wife's scientific precision. Comfortable conversation between people who'd survived a war together and came out choosing each other. "I've been thinking about Catherine lately," Victor said during dessert. "Wondering what she'd think of all this. The foundation named after her, the work we're doing, how her death ended up mattering. She'd be proud of you." "I hope so. I spent so long being angry that she was gone. It took years to turn that anger into something useful instead of just destructive. He looked at Lena. You helped with that. Watching you channel your trauma into purpose. It showed me how. We helped each other. That's how this works. Yeah, it is. 10 years after the trial, Lena attended Reginald Hale's funeral. He died in prison of a heart attack, still serving his sentence. The funeral was small. A few family members, some former business associates who felt obligated to attend, and Lena. She stood in the back of the church, watching Catherine dab at her eyes with practiced grief. Adrian wasn't there. He'd apparently cut all ties with his family, was living under an assumed name somewhere in the Midwest. Lena didn't feel triumph at Reginald's death, didn't feel vindicated or satisfied. She just felt tired. This man had tried to own her, had nearly succeeded, had destroyed so many lives in his pursuit of power and control. And now he was just gone. Reduced to a body in a casket, mourned by people who'd benefited from his crimes but would deny knowing about them. The pastor spoke about his philanthropy, his business acumen, his dedication to family. The eulogy was all lies, but that seemed fitting. Reginald had built an empire on lies. His death might as well be commemorated with more. After the service, Catherine approached Lena in the parking lot. You came, she said, sounding surprised. I needed to see it was really over. Is it? Over. Lena considered that. For me, yes. I stopped being defined by what your family did to me a long time ago. But for everyone else they hurt, the communities, the employees, the other victims, it'll never be completely over. Trauma doesn't work that way. Catherine looked older than her years, hollowed out by association with crimes she'd enabled, if not committed. I really didn't know. About most of it, I mean. I knew Reginald could be ruthless in business, but I didn't know about you, about the coercion. Yes, you did, Lena said it gently, without anger. You knew your husband was capable of it. You knew Adrian was learning to be just like him. You chose not to look too closely because looking would have required action. Catherine's face crumpled. I'm sorry, for whatever that's worth. It's worth acknowledging. It doesn't change anything, but it's worth saying. They stood in silence for a moment. Two women shaped by the same man's cruelty in completely different ways. What will you do now? Lena asked. I don't know. Live quietly, I suppose. Try to make amends in small ways. It's all I have left. That's more than Reginald managed. He died still believing he was justified. Catherine nodded and walked away, shoulders bent under the weight of complicity. Lena watched her go, feeling something like pity. Catherine had been trapped too, in her own way, but she'd had resources and power that could have been used to stop her husband. She'd chosen comfort over courage. That was a choice Lena would never understand but could at least recognize. 12 years after the trial, the foundation celebrated its 10th anniversary. They'd helped over 1,000 families, won dozens of legal victories, changed corporate accountability laws in 6 states. The impact was measurable and meaningful. At the anniversary gala, Lena gave a speech. She talked about Rita, about Catherine Moretti, about every person who'd fought corporate corruption and paid for it with their lives or livelihoods. We exist because the system fails people, Lena said. Because power protects power, and the people without it need someone in their corner. That's what we are. We're the corner where the powerless can stand and find they're not alone. After the speech, a woman in her 30s approached. She looked familiar, but Lena couldn't place her. You don't remember me, the woman said. I was at that survivors conference 8 years ago. I asked you how to stop being angry. Lena did remember vaguely. Did you find your answer? Eventually, I started a nonprofit too, helping survivors of domestic violence navigate the legal system. I realized you were right. The anger doesn't go away, but it can become something constructive. The woman smiled. I wanted to thank you for showing me it was possible. You did the work. I just told you what I'd learned. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes knowing someone else survived and built something meaningful from the wreckage, that's what gives you permission to try. They talked for a while longer. The woman had helped 60 families in the past 5 years, was planning to expand, had turned her own trauma into purpose, just like Lena and Rita and so many others. The ripple effect of refusing to be silenced. 15 years after the trial, Lena stepped down as director of the foundation. She stayed on the board, stayed involved, but the day-to-day leadership passed to someone younger, someone with fresh energy and new ideas. You sure about this? Victor asked when she announced the transition. I'm sure. The foundation doesn't need me anymore. It's bigger than my story now. That's exactly what it should be. What will you do? I don't know yet. Maybe nothing for a while. Maybe travel. Maybe something completely different. The point is, I get to choose, and whatever I choose will be mine. Victor hugged her. Catherine would be proud. Rita would be proud. I'm proud. I'm proud too, of all of us, for building something that lasts. She meant it. The foundation would continue long after Lena was gone, would help people she'd never meet, fight battles she'd never witness. Her story, the woman who'd said no at an altar and brought down an empire, would eventually be forgotten by most people, but the work would remain. That was legacy enough. 20 years after the trial, Lena was invited to speak at a law school about corporate accountability. She almost declined. It had been a long time since she'd told her story publicly, but the professor was persistent. My students need to understand what it looks like when the system fails, the professor said, and what it takes to make it work anyway. So Lena went. She stood in front of a lecture hall filled with 20-year-olds who'd been children when the Hale trial happened. To them, it was history. A case they'd studied, not a life someone had lived. The law is supposed to protect people, Lena said, but it only works if people are willing to use it, and using it requires resources most victims don't have. Money for lawyers, time to fight, emotional stamina to be interrogated and doubted and judged. The system isn't designed for justice. It's designed for those who can afford to pursue it. A student raised his hand. So, what's the solution? How do we fix it? You make sure the people without resources aren't fighting alone. You build support systems. You advocate for legal reforms that make justice more accessible. You show up when someone needs help, even if there's nothing in it for you. Lena paused. And sometimes, you just refuse to quit when powerful people expect you to. That's how the Hales lost. Not because the system worked perfectly, but because enough people refused to let it fail completely. After the lecture, students lined up to ask questions. How had she found the courage? How had she rebuilt her life? What advice did she have for people facing their own battles against powerful institutions? Lena answered each question honestly. Some days she hadn't had courage. She'd just had stubbornness and people who wouldn't let her quit. Rebuilding had taken years and therapy and accepting that some damage was permanent. Her advice was simple. Find your people, tell your truth, and refuse to let anyone convince you that submission is inevitable. One student lingered after the others left. My mom worked for a company that got bought by Hale Industries back in the day, she said quietly. They fired her when she complained about safety violations. She lost everything, never really recovered. I'm sorry. She told me about you, though, about how you stood up to them and won. She said it helped her feel less alone, like her fight mattered even though she lost. The student's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I just wanted you to know that your story, it helped my mom survive. That's worth something. It's worth everything, Lena said softly. Tell your mom I'm grateful. And I'm sorry the system failed her. She knows. But thank you. 25 years after the trial, Lena was in her 60s. Marcus's kid, now an adult, was in law school, planning to specialize in corporate accountability. Victor had retired and spent his time mentoring young activists. The foundation had helped over 5,000 families, and Lena lived quietly in a house she'd bought with money from a book she'd finally agreed to write. The book had sold well, not because it was sensational, but because it was honest. A memoir about coercion, survival, and rebuilding. The proceeds went to the foundation. One evening, sitting on her porch, watching the sunset, Lena thought about the woman she'd been at that altar. Terrified, trapped, believing she had no choice. What would that woman think if she could see where she ended up? She'd be surprised, probably. Proud, hopefully. Relieved that saying no had been the right choice, even when it felt impossible. Lena had lived a full life. Not a perfect one. There'd been setbacks and struggles and moments where the trauma resurfaced unexpectedly. But it had been hers. Every moment, every choice, every victory and failure. That was the point of freedom. Not perfection, not ease, just ownership. Her phone rang. Marcus, calling to check in. How are you doing? He asked. The same question he'd asked every Sunday for 25 years. Good, really good. Just sitting here thinking about how far we've come. We've come pretty far. further than we had any right to expect considering where we started. You know what I think, Marcus said. I think we were always going to end up okay. Because we had each other, that was always enough. Lena smiled. Yeah, it was. They talked until the sun had fully set and the stars were visible. Easy conversation between siblings who'd survived something terrible and come out choosing each other every single day. After they hung up, Lena sat in the darkness for a while longer. She thought about Reginald Hale, dead for 15 years, his empire dismantled and forgotten. She thought about Adrian, living somewhere under an assumed name, trying to atone for crimes that couldn't be undone. She thought about all the people who'd helped her, Victor and Sarah and Daniel and Rita, and so many others, some still alive, some gone, all of them woven into the fabric of who she'd become. And she thought about herself. The woman who'd stood at an altar trembling and found the courage to say no. That woman had been braver than she knew. That woman had saved her own life. That woman deserved the peace she'd finally found. Thank you, Lena whispered into the darkness, speaking to her past self. Thank you for being strong enough to save us both. The night was quiet. The stars were bright. And Lena Cross, survivor and advocate, and finally, completely herself, was free.